This is for the loan for the water main agreement. The contract for the water main replacement, we reviewed that, right? We're not ready to raise anything.
Is there a,
He didn't review it for content or anything like that, 'cause that's a, he said that was a pretty standard
legal
deal.
sufficiency?
Yeah, you said that it wasn't much that you thought we could change on those things.
Oh, the, you're talking about the,
That's all right.
yeah, it's
My kids are playing some big
not
game.
the money side.
That's awesome.
Well, she's ready for her to sign, so that's.
Right around the name of that thing.
That's for the network.
I'll make myself proud right now.
I mean, it's, they're not gonna negotiate terms with us.
It's very good. You'll go so you can get in it.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, but I don't know if it's standard.
I mean, I did not read it.
That's actually pretty awesome.
But I've seen those in the past, went through it, and it's all the necessary provisions in terms of sufficiency.
So you're right, I think she can sign that.
If you want the money.
Okay.
This is pretty official.
That's my legal opinion.
All right. Okay, it's 6 o'clock. I'll go ahead and get started. It's our October 3rd, 2022 workshop meeting. Lori, can I get roll call?
Mayor Young,
Here?
Vice Mayor Stone,
Here.
Councilmember D'Ambra, Councilmember Brandon,
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. And if the rest of council is okay with it, I know Councilmember Brandon had a couple words she wanted to say.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. So on behalf of all of us up here, we did just want to take a moment to acknowledge what has happened, that the West Coast residents took a hit for us, and that we are in touch with local groups and leaders over on the West Coast, and that we are doing everything we can at this time to help. I know that our PD, along with other local departments, sent some crew over to assist where they can, and they will rotate in and out on a weekly basis. And if we get details from over there exactly what they need, we will absolutely put it out to the community and get stuff over there and help direct it directly to the people. So I just wanted to acknowledge that a lot of us have family and friends over there, and we have them all in our thoughts and our prayers. And we may start the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. All right, the first agenda item is review and discuss business flare evaluation report, identifying baseline trends prior to the closing of the US 1 bridge. Tessa?
Hi Council, good evening. Good evening, Mr. Allen and Keith and Lori. With the upcoming US 1 bridge closure, the village, as you know, has been seeking innovative ways to mitigate the impact upon businesses. Business Flare is an excellent resource for this purpose. They have collected baseline economic data to provide insight into how the village and local businesses can prepare for the coming challenges. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Crowder with Business Flare. So, welcome, Kevin.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Trying to get it so they'll show up on streaming as well. So, all right, let's go for it.
All right. Thank you. Good evening. My name's Kevin Crowder. I'm the owner of Business Flare, a consulting firm based here in Florida. I'll tell you a little bit about our firm in a couple of slides. But what we're here to talk about is sort of an economic overview for the village, and then look at some foot traffic trends, especially in advance of the closure of the US 1 bridge. So we'll talk a little bit about the economy overall, your community profile, sort of a little bit about your real estate, your businesses, your employment makeup of the jobs that you have here in the village, and some of those trends. And then we'll talk about the foot traffic trends. On foot traffic, we looked at sort of three primary audiences. We looked at your residents here in the village, and where are the places that they frequent? Restaurants, shops, work, different places that they're traveling to and from the village to get to. We looked at the workers. We looked at the workers who work in the village. Where do they live? What are the routes that they take? What are the stores or restaurants here in the village that they will shop and dine at while they're here? What times of day we look at days of the week, etc. And then we looked at all visitors. Separate from the employees and the residents, we looked at visitors to the village. Now, they may be coming to shop at one of your restaurants or shop at one of your stores or dine at a restaurant. They may be coming for a special event. They may be coming to visit friends and family. It could be any of those things. But they're coming from outside of the village for different reasons. And we look at sort of what are the top visitor destinations that you have here. And then we also looked at what are the top destinations on the other side of the bridge for your residents. Where are the top places that they're going to try and understand sort of some of those characteristics. And this is something that we want to understand now. And then as this goes forward, watch how those behaviors change over time. How do the customers actually react to and respond? What we'll do with that is we use a number of different data sources. We use some that you're familiar with, like Census and Bureau of Labor Statistics and stuff. But for the foot traffic, we partnered at the beginning of the pandemic with a firm called Placer. And what they do is they do foot traffic analysis and tracking for shopping center owners, major retailers, and have become really the go-to firm for all of the major shopping center retail real estate firms. What it is it's essentially tracking cell phones. When you opt in to location access on an app on your phone, then all of that data is being aggregated and then being analyzed. It's all goes through a number of different layers, and you see they've got privacy protections in there and different things. But what it does is it really has been a powerful tool, and I think we're over 2,000 different apps that it's drawing from to really understand what's happening with that location data. A little bit about our firm. We're based in North Miami. work a lot through the Tri-County region, really throughout the state of Florida on economic development, redevelopment, economic impact, market analysis. With me today, Allison Justice is here. Allison and I have worked together for a long time. She's Palm Beach County based as well, a consultant that's starting to work with us on some of our Palm Beach County projects, especially. We are sort of local. We have an office in Singer Island, so we are right down the street. But a lot of economic analysis, and going back just myself, I've been consulting for about 10 years, mostly South Florida. Before that, I spent 17 years as the economic development director in Miami Beach. And so lots of just different types of, especially this. I mean, I was the liaison to 11 blocks of Collins Avenue right after all of the Delano and all those hotels were renovated, FDOT coming in to fully reconstruct the roadway. So I'm very understanding of sort of the seats that you're in and kind of a lot of the uncertainty that can come with this type of project. We're going to start, so the study areas for most of the data are going to be either the village itself, so we looked at within your village boundaries. Some of the data is only available at the zip code level. So, and I think in here you'll see which one it is, and I'll make sure and point out if it's not clear, if we're looking at zip code or at village. And then we looked on the foot traffic, especially when we're looking at where the customers live or where they work. We looked at these additional zip codes on the other side of the bridge. So obviously you have the zip code that you're in here. You know, on the other side you have what we identified as primary, secondary, and tertiary. The primary being that there to the east on the other side of the bridge where the US 1 bridge is actually located. Secondary, Alt A1A, that one right up against the river. And then we have the four that kind of wrap around it that again are customer markets of yours. They're not quite as many customers as you see with the primary and the secondary, especially the secondary, which feeds a lot of customers to Tequesta. But you'll see these zip codes repeated as we go through the information. We started with just a community profile. So again, as I mentioned, some of this is going to be for the village, some is for the overall zip code. You know, you've got both in the village as well as in the zip code, you've got a diversity of ages, but you're heavier in the sort of 45 and up compared to a lot of other communities. Your median age is higher. Your median age, I think, is about 54. High value homes, high income. We see the same thing throughout the zip code. One thing that you'll see is there on the right, an aging population without the sort of millennial workforce coming in behind it. Now you're part of a large metropolitan area, and so you know sometimes those stats can get concerning to communities when they see that. You know, when you're a small community like you are, you're part of a larger region that's really a regional workforce. It's a regional economy, a regional job market, and so you have the ability to kind of respond to or adapt to that situation better than more isolated communities. Just a little bit more there. You have, as I mentioned, you have higher home values, you have higher household incomes, you have very high home ownership compared to probably the highest that we've seen in most of the communities that we work in. You have, your housing stock is not as old as, again, in a lot of communities that we work in, high educational attainment, but you do have a fairly high commute time compared to some other communities. And you'll see that in a minute in some of the more employment data. And you have and I mentioned, you have a very highly educated population. And even there in the median home value, this is more of the census information. We'll talk about what we see actually in your housing market in a minute. On the commercial real estate, you know, your retail, you're familiar with sort of your real estate markets. Your retail, 600,000 square feet around, a lot of that concentrated along US 1. Your office, you've got a very small office market, 222,000 square feet, very boutique type of market, especially considering the significant amount of office that you have to the south of you, Palm Beach Gardens. and such. But all your fundamentals on both of these sectors are strong. You have healthy rents, you have low vacancy. One thing you have, though, is just from an overall economic development perspective, is you don't have a lot of turnover in your commercial real estate. And so that limits opportunities for new businesses to really be able to come in. And on the residential side, top left is year-to-date through July. The bottom one is the full year of 2021. So you can see that even the first 6-7 months of this year, your median sale price continued to increase compared to where it ended last year. Your residential real estate is showing what we're seeing almost everywhere. You've got, demand up there and either increasing or leveling off. You've got supply continuing to decline, and that's what continues to push the prices up. South Florida in general seems to be still a little bit different than what may be some of the national trends, even with increasing interest rates and such. The supply-demand dynamics are just so sort of extreme. They'll come back, but that housing price especially will continue to stay elevated. And you can see active inventory 9. So the supply issues are a real issue. Just a snapshot, local restaurants, looking at, since that's especially a lot of what you have along US 1, you have restaurants of all different sizes. You have restaurants with 1 employee, restaurants up to 40 employees, sales that can range from $100,000 to $2 million, maybe even more. And so understanding, this will be, as we get through and really start looking at understanding some of the real impacts as the bridge happens, you'll be able to start understanding what can that potentially mean in terms of revenues and jobs. Keeping in mind that the impacts from the bridge closure doesn't mean that people won't keep coming. It just means that there are trips that can be affected and impacted. And then when we look at your employment here, your job base in Tequesta is heavily retail, especially compared to on the right. You have a pretty diverse business mix when it comes to the number of businesses and the types of businesses, but they're small businesses. They're small employee businesses. You have some very large retailers with some of the department stores that you have, Publix and some of those, so that throws your retail employment up really high compared to all of the other industries that you have here. It's also one of the industries that you're most likely to be importing workers rather than having workforce that lives in your community also working in your community. This one, there's a lot of info on this chart. What this looks at is your largest industries in the zip code. So this is a data source that's only available for the zip code overall. We also look at the different types of occupations that can be in multiple industries. What I really noticed here, and you'll see we made some notes on them, is retail, even in the whole zip code, is still your highest employment industry. What you'll notice, though, that as you look at both the occupations and the industries, you'll see that the ones that demonstrate the high earnings growth are the ones that you don't have a lot of in this zip code and in the city. It is still very service oriented. It reminds me a lot of, if you're familiar with Dade County, if you're familiar with the village of Pinecrest, one of the highest income communities in the city. But if you go down US 1, US 1 is not retailed for this high income community that it's adjacent to. It's retailed for the commuter traffic that's going through there. And you have a very similar characteristic when it comes to US 1 and a lot of the job base that you have here. And so when we go back and start looking at things like this small amount of office space that you have, 220,000 square feet, but if you do have some opportunity, you start seeing opportunities for maybe people who live here who own businesses elsewhere, especially if you look on the right, some of these occupations, legal, architecture, some of those, that could become opportunities for someone to open a boutique office here, be closer to home, especially in light of a bridge closure that they may have to try and deal with commuting to an office that they have elsewhere. There can be sort of little wins, base hits instead of home runs when it comes to economic development that could be out there. And so you want to keep an eye on, as this goes through, not just tracking foot traffic and how customer foot traffic changes, but also tracking things like your real estate. what is becoming vacant, how is business turnover, whether from the closer or just in general. There always is a little bit of that happening. So being able to identify some of those opportunities. So this is for the village. This is from the Census Bureau. This is based on state reporting through unemployment insurance, in looking at where employees live and where they work. And so you see, again, and it's no different than we see in other kind of, higher income communities that have high retail employment in their community. The workers who live in the community work elsewhere. The people who work in the community are coming from somewhere else. And this is generally the case both in the village as well as in your zip code. So when we take that a next step and start looking at where they work, you see same data, but just a heat map on one side and then census tract to the right. We like the heat map better just because some of the census tracts sometimes get drawn in sort of these shapes that really don't tell you the real story on where people are working. And then additionally, when we look at the placer data, the foot traffic data there on the left, you see a little more detailed heat map. At just really what that range is all the way down to West Palm Beach. And then on the right, we wanted to kind of zoom in, and you've got kind of two circles that we identified. And basically one at the south end of the US 1 bridge, and sort of the areas there where your residents work, and then also at the south end once you cross A1A alternate, just to kind of get an idea of what those clusters of employment locations are for your residents. So you start seeing where that impact can take place.
So can you, the previous slide in this, I don't know if everyone else is following. I'm a little lost at the blobs on the screen. Can you, especially the previous one, can you explain it a little bit better? Is that
Sure.
All of those areas are where, specifically in Tequesta, are going to work?
Correct. So right now we're going to just start with just your residents.
Okay.
And so these are the locations where they are working.
And so you have actual numbers too on that. Okay.
Right. Yep. And in fact, each of the dots, now in some cases, what they do with these location dots is they don't give you an exact location. Again, that's part of the anonymous nature of the system they put in. But those dots, each dot represents about 50 monthly trips to that location by village residents for employment. It's generally going to be within about a block. It's not going to be right on top of where that exact establishment is. But you do have a number that are going, that it's more convenient to use the US 1 bridge than A1A alternate to get to those locations, the smaller circle there to the right. Then we kind of zoomed in on that right across the river for where your residents, what were, say, the top 10 places that your residents go to on the other side of the river for different activities. And you see them listed there on the right. It's entertainment, it's restaurants and bars, some recreation, movies. We have groceries. You have Publix up here, and you'll see Publix again in a few slides. But Fresh Market is an alternate. You can get your Publix here. You may have residents that prefer to go to one of those Publix down there just for personal preference reasons, but they're going to be able to go to a Publix on this side when the bridge is closed. But things like Fresh Market and other secondary or alternate type grocers is one reason for people to go across. But one thing to look here, and we started making a few notes on actions, is you've got a lot of, and we spent time here again today just going through all of the different areas, looking at all of the different small businesses and different things you have, is just the increase in awareness of what is here. That if you're going over there for one of these 10 things, most likely that same good or service you're going to be able to get here. You just may not know where it is. You may not know that it's here. You may also be seeking variety, which becomes an opportunity maybe for some of your businesses to adapt and have some additional offerings. Understand you know, why are they going over here for one thing? Maybe in the bars, maybe it's live music, maybe it's different types of things that some of your establishments could offer. So the next audience we looked at are the workers that work in Tequesta. And where do they live? Where are they coming from? Where are they commuting from? So again, heat map, they provide the census tract map too, but you can see that there's a lot of those census tracts sometimes are large, especially once you get over into Martin County and there's a lot of uninhabited land. So it's not as large as it makes it look, so you can tell by the heat map there on the left what's actually, where those locations actually generally are. When we go to the foot traffic data again, not so much directly down right across the river on US 1, but a lot across in the A1A alternate. So again, thinking about the fact that once that bridge closes, you're going to have that much more traffic looking to use A1A. You do have a fair amount of workers coming from the south side of the river right there in, I think that's 469 zip code, 468. But again, your workers, live a lot closer than, say, when you think about the last chart on where your residents go to work. Your residents travel farther for work than your workers here come from their home to get to their job here. And then we looked at, okay, what do the workers do when they're here? So some of the places, they visit your shopping centers, they visit Publix, CVS, Marshalls, some of your different restaurants, Rockies. And so one thing here also is if you, and this will be something interesting, especially once the project is underway, to understand how workers are actually responding to the closure. We can project and we can guess and we can try to get into some customer psychology, but again, thinking about exposing or increasing that awareness to the people who work here about everything that's here and all of the different places that they can go for shopping or dining to get it out of the way before they get in traffic, because once they're in the traffic, they're just going to want to get home. So there may be things that they do on the way home once they get on the other side of the river that they have the opportunity to do here, and help increase some of the business that is here for your local businesses. And then the third audience we looked at is the visitors that come to the village. We just zoomed in over on the right. This is the one, I didn't point it out in the last ones, but you see the map on the roadways. All of the maps so far, when we looked at the employees and when we looked at your residents going to work, the only one that was red was A1A alternate. The US 1 was gold. I mean, it's second in line, but this one, though, on the visitors, you see both bridges are showing red in that heaviest used roadways to get here. This one we just added. The service is constantly adding new tools. They just launched this tool last week where we can actually now, besides what usually happens is we draw a geofence around the store. They have a lot of verified ones that are, shopping centers, anyone in the retail industry is already in their system. But what they've done now is we can drop a pin on a roadway and we can look at whatever time range we pick, and we can understand the same data for all of the cars that actually passed through there. When we're doing the geofence or we're looking at a shopping center or even at a business district, their algorithms filter out traffic, like transient traffic, UPS drivers and that sort of thing. But in this one, they can actually look at sort of the different roadways. So we went ahead and dropped pins on the two bridges just to see how they ranked. It's generally followed the same trend, and A1A alternate is higher than US 1, which is what we expected and what we see in the regular data. But then we looked at sort of between weekday and weekends. You can see the US 1 bridge gets a little more of the share of the traffic once you get into the weekends. You see A1A alternate in the late night and early morning takes over a lot of it, just because people are trying to get home probably, or where they're going, and there's not a lot of traffic at those times. So that's just going to be the sort of the path of least resistance. Other than that, you see kind of throughout the day it stays fairly even once you get into about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. This one, when I went back and looked at this, I should have put the charts, flipped them. So we're going to start with the charts on the right, not the ones on the left. We wanted to look at sort of what are the different baselines? What have we seen in terms of the foot traffic patterns here in the village, looking at all three audiences, your residents, your visitors to the village, which is the highest one, the blue, and the people who work, your workforce that's working here. So we look pre-pandemic, and you can see a clear seasonality in your visitors in there. You see, while it's slight, you see a little bit of a reflection of that in your employees that work here, the red line. So that visitor seasonality is going to have an economic trend that's going to affect employment. It's a little different than what you see on the residents, where you see as you get that drop in around September is where you start getting a peak in your resident traffic. If you look below it, though, what we see, we ran this from June to June. What we were looking for was something we see in a lot of different communities. Is when is that period in the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, that we start seeing stabilized trends in the foot traffic? And here we saw it June to June, but you can see sort of a flattening and less seasonality throughout a 12-month period in visitors, in employment, kind of in all three pieces. And that's very similar to things that we've seen in a lot of different communities, especially in South Florida, and especially the communities closer to the coast. On the visitors, we look, and there's a lot of, well, actually the next slide will show you a little bit of this. We looked at the time of day that visitors are coming in, lunchtime, dinner time, being two of your peaks. Weekends higher than weekdays as well. So again, as you start thinking about, getting into, maintenance of traffic and as those things start approaching, understanding your customer behaviors is going to be important in that traffic management program as well. And then you see on the right the top home zip code of the visitors. Again, the zip code 458 right on the other side of A1A alternate is your top feeder visitor zip code. Your second one is the remainder of the zip code, your zip code, so coming from your immediate surroundings visiting you. And then your third is that right across the US 1 bridge is coming from 477. This is the other new tool that they just added last week. And what we were able to do is we were able to separate weekday traffic from weekend traffic. And so there's a lot of colors on that. On the left side on the map, though, we wanted to look and say, differentiate between the visitors that live in each of those zip codes, and if they come primarily, if the majority of them come during the week, color it blue. And if the majority from those zip codes come on the weekends, color it red, to start understanding. And you'll see the red becomes more prominent. There's still more blue, but as you get further away. So it is those weekends that people are going to be traveling a longer distance. Now it doesn't mean that it's a significant customer base for you. And you see in the chart on the right how that customer base starts diminishing in real numbers of visitors that are coming. Again, those that we talked about being kind of there at the top. But it does show you, kind of some of those differences, and those differences are going to be very important when you start getting into the individual businesses and how their individual customer base is going to be impacted by the bridge closure, and kind of what opportunities do they have to come up with programs or advertising or different things that businesses can put in place if they understand, have a little more data, a little more knowledge about some of these trends. Where do they live? You've got a lot that live right across the river. You've got a lot that live, kind of throughout Jupiter and down into North Palm Beach Gardens. And then in Martin County, the area between Hobe Sound and Port Salerno is your primary area of where visitors live in Martin County. A little bit going all the way up to Stewart, but it's really that Hobe Sound to Salerno that's the primary. So here we started looking, and there's going to be two slides of this, started looking at different types of shopping locations to see where these visitors, where are their favorite places that they shop. So you can see the shopping centers, Palm Beach Gardens, West Palm Beach, you know, your major malls. You know, on apparel, again, way down West Palm Beach primarily. On superstores, that should say it's actually superstores and department stores. So you have some of that here, especially at on US 1 at like Marshall's and those. And then you have, again, a lot down West Palm Beach. And then groceries, you've got two Publix on the other side, but you've got a Publix here. Again, you know, some of your residents may prefer one of those on the south side. You know, people find their favorite meat man and they keep going to that store. But it is something that is here. But what we did see in the next categories is we did see a cluster popping up on both sides of the river really close. When we started looking at the favorite places for dining, favorite places, bars and pubs, leisure and recreation. These are the things that really started popping up on sort of both sides of the river, and the places that for your visitors, their favorite places. And so this is the place where thinking about those clusters on the north and south side of the river, and then think about that cluster of where your visitors live, and having that primary market, visitor market coming from the south, kind of starts giving you some of that understanding of kind of how the customer trip can be impacted here as it relates to some of your businesses. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those, mainly shopping centers, but we did highlight a few businesses in here as well. So looked at the top destinations. Besides these shopping centers, we did look at the Cypress industrial area, which you split with Jupiter. But County Line Plaza, up where Publix is, what we see here, you know, about 11% of your visitors are coming from those two primary zip codes on the south side. Now you've got visitors coming from all over, not just from those Jupiter zip codes, but from even longer distances in some cases. But what we ran here in the middle is looked at the trade area at 40%, 60, and 80% trade areas. And for this shopping center, the 40%, which is the pink, doesn't really extend over the river. So that primary 40% trade area is on the north side of the river for this shopping center. Obviously, the different businesses in that shopping center are going to have a different experience. Rockies is going to have a different experience than Publix. When we look at Tequesta shops, though, where Marshall's and Bell's and all of those are, you see how widespread that 40% trade area is in pink throughout the region. So again, just like each business is going to have its own individual characteristics, just even your shopping centers that are, you know, just a few blocks away from each other, or in some cases even next to each other, are going to have different experiences. And so for Tequesta shops, 18% of the foot traffic is coming from those two primary zip codes on the south side of the river. And then down where West Marine and Pet Supermarket and a lot of small businesses are at Tequesta Galleries, sort of the same thing, not quite as extensive in the pink going across the river, but it clearly still does to a pretty good extent. 16% of the visitors to this shopping center coming from those two zip codes right on the other side of the river, 477 and 458. And I did mention all three of these centers show the same thing on the traffic patterns. It's A1A alternate being that primary route. So there's going to be two slides for each of these. One is going to show you the real actual numbers of monthly visits, and the other one's going to show you a percentage share for that business. Because, you know, Publix, you can see, is pretty dominant compared to any of the other businesses here, even shopping centers. I mean, the overall Tequesta shops is about half what just Publix is getting, but Publix is a big draw. But while you see some showing up with very small columns on this one, that's number of visitors. But when we start looking at the percentage that are coming from locally here in Tequesta or in red from Hope Sound that'll still be sort of unaffected by the bridge closure in terms of getting from their home to these businesses. When you look at their percentages, you start seeing how important that local market is or is not to some of those businesses. So, Publix at 40% has a higher dependency on the local market compared to, say, Bell's or Marshall's or Home Goods. And that's the same, that's consistent with what you saw in the 40, 60, 80 maps, where you saw the Tequesta shops having a much broader, drawing from a much wider geography in even its primary. But you have some, ranging 20%, 30% down. Fashion Mall Gallery Square here, next door to you, just over 30% locally from Tequesta. Then we looked across the river at those different zip codes that we were looking at. The main ones right on the other side in Jupiter. Again, how much are they drawing? So one thing you'll see is given the number of small businesses that you have in these shopping centers, besides the anchors, you'll see a big difference here in County Line Plaza. When you look at just the trips, how much of your local traffic to that shopping center was for Publix, compared to how much regional traffic or traffic from Jupiter is still going to that shopping center, but not for the Publix. They're going for other things, and not so much for Rockies. You can see there's still a big gap there of additional trips that are coming for other businesses that are located in that shopping center. And then here again, when we look at the actual counts, some businesses are going to draw more people than other businesses, but we want to understand what does it mean in terms of foot traffic to these businesses. And we see pretty consistently for your different types of businesses, whether it's a Great Clips, Marshall's, Bell's, that says Papi Chulo's, that's not Papi Chulo's, that's actually Home Goods. There's an error in the spreadsheet behind it. But you see pretty consistently about 20% of the foot traffic coming from across the river, from those main zip codes in Jupiter. 20% of affected trips, 20% is a significant amount of customer base that's going to be affected. One thing this doesn't do is this does not have spending data associated with those trips. This is just the foot traffic. It's not how much they're spending when they get to the store or not spending. And we're almost done and can get into more discussion or questions or anything that you like. We did look at, again, come back to your residents. Understanding what we looked at here, that the south side of the river customer base being about 20% of the overall customer base for these shopping centers and the businesses we identified. We wanted to understand, what does your residents as customers mean for businesses on the other side? And so there on the left you see sort of the counts, but we see on the right, when we looked at the share of those businesses customers, it's not 20%, it's 5%. You've got a couple that are around 7%. And so the impact to their customer base on that side compared to for your businesses the other way is not as significant. That's a lot. There's a lot more data than this. This data has so many rabbit holes that you can spend all night sitting there, and all of a sudden it's 5 a.m. just once you click on one thing. But here it's so these are sort of the initial findings. Look forward to any questions you have, additional things that trigger things we need to look into and dig into a little more. Come back with that and sort of update these findings, and then give you some additional sort of recommendations. There's not a lot that's in your power to actually do here, but education, awareness, communication are things that become really important there. Looking for what's meaningful data that we can dig into that can be useful for your businesses is going to be something. And there might be a few some different things that we could give you some ideas on for that. And then from there is really sort of monitoring quarterly to see how do the customers actually behave, because one of the things we want to understand in that also is, are there behavior changes that have the potential of becoming permanent once the bridge reopens. And how do you reverse negative changes once the bridge reopens, and how do you keep the good ones that happen? So even looking over at Jupiter Inlet Colony, where are they going on the south side of the river that you can capitalize on and make sure that they know what's available for them to access here when it comes to goods and services and different things. And hopefully, you've got a lot of small businesses, entrepreneurs, so creating just those personal relationships with your customers and how that can carry them forward even once the bridge reopens. So with that, hopefully not too overwhelming, but look forward to any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. It was a lot of information,
It's
but
a
good
lot.
information.
It is a
So
lot.
I'll open the floor. Any council comments?
Start to finish, how long did that take, all that data compiled?
It's hard to say. Probably, I think we probably, it kind of comes in spurts, but I'd say that's probably about 60 hours.
Okay, so
50.
I asked that to ask, when you mention update findings and impacts, how often, when would we be looking at updates? How often?
So we're built in as a quarterly update, but we'll be pulling the data in monthly.
Okay,
And the model is already built, so all of the sort of engineering
Yeah.
software and all of that is done. So it's just a matter of the APIs pulling in the latest data into the street. And then it kind of pretty much will update it. I mean, we have the ability to look more often. It's just a matter of running it. This data, the one thing we like the most about this data is compared to, how long it takes to get census and labor and all of that. This is 5 to 8 days old is the, so yeah, with the model built in, it's just, we don't know yet how often there's going to be something to see that's really going to set a trend to react to.
well, I look forward to it, that was really interesting stuff. Thank you.
Yes, I would love to actually sit with that, like you said, and go down the little rabbit holes. But that's the marketing side of my brain, because I could already think of so many great things we could do if we were a marketing agency, which we aren't, but that's kind of what I do, so in my personal life, but yeah, my wheels start spinning.
Yeah.
But thank you, that is definitely a lot. Now, for me, I know that we are kind of hounded a lot by what are we doing for businesses, we need to support them, and we always sit up here and say we do support them, and we absolutely always welcome them to any of our events to get them exposure, get their name in front of residents. For me, this is a big gift to our businesses because we just got data for them that they can utilize, and for me, it's what are they gonna do with it? It's once a customer, whether it's local or just in the outside zip code gets there, what are you gonna do on your end for that customer? Yeah, so I pretty much just sit with thank you for getting this, because I'm hoping we're gonna share this with businesses and obviously us as well, and then they can look at it for their perspective and start to make game plans on their marketing end of what they're gonna do when the bridge closes. Are they feeling like they're gonna be getting a lot of people from the south? How can they go out of their way to work with people from the north? Are they gonna do special events? Are they going to utilize the information that pretty much showcase that lunch and dinner is a big hot spot for us, but we are obviously not the nightlife. We're not West Palm Beach.
Right.
So how can you capitalize on that and draw customers in a creative way? So thank you for all that information, and I'm excited to give that to business owners and see what they do with it.
Right, and some of our, when we do the recommendations, will be some of the things that you as a village could do in terms of awareness or communication and that sort of thing. And then some ideas on ways that businesses, either things we've seen before or things that we think businesses can consider as they look at this data in terms of adapting.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we're gonna stop trying to help them. I think we're always open to creative ideas, but for me, this is just a really good starting point. It's a gift to them.
I think the other thing, and we didn't really get into it in here, is really understanding a lot of that time of day of week. Look at your employees. Look at, not just the times of day that your visitors are coming, but what are the times of days that your employees are coming. Because if you think about, the road projects, engineers don't use this type of data. Engineers use IT manual and some general standards, but and the relevant, and they're going to have peak hour traffic count information for you, but it may not be peak hour for individual businesses. or for specific shopping centers. And so there's a customer side of it that's different than just the traffic transportation side that can be exactly what you're talking about, really helpful for the businesses to understand those trends, but can be helpful with you as you work with FDOT on the maintenance of traffic, some of those different hours or just the timing of how they're doing different closures or reroutes or anything on their side.
I was going to add, and thank you for presenting this. It looks like we've got around 2,000 employees that come into the Village of Tequesta to work, and I didn't pick up on how much of those employees actually leave during the day to maybe go somewhere shopping somewhere else. But I think that might be an opportunity for our local businesses to capture them, since they probably might not be going elsewhere.
Right.
And did I see that the local business has the potential of losing around 20% or so of visitors from outside coming in on a average basis?
On average, it's about, I wouldn't yet say, potential of impacted.
Yep.
I would say they're going to lose them yet, but
Better words.
but yes, it is about 20% of their customer base that
That
will
could
be
be
impacted
impacted.
by this closure.
Yep. And only about 5 or 7% of those on this side of the, call it the river, are going to be impacted going somewhere else.
On the other side, impacted by your residents not coming to them.
Okay.
Right.
So that can offset it a little bit.
Right. One thing that when it comes to your workers and your residents here, we work in a lot of communities, and a lot of the times you just don't realize everything that you have available for you in your own community. And when we do economic development, we have 5 things, sort of 5 strategy areas that we look at that support economic development. What can you preserve? What can you invest in? Enhancements, things to capitalize on. But the most important one, and the thing that at small levels or really big ones, and Allison worked on one of the biggest ones we ever worked on, which was Funky Buddha in Oakland Park, is expose. It's what do you have that if people only knew it was there, it would make a big difference. And so even communicating to people who work here or to your residents of everything you have available in your business community, all of these small businesses, and we saw them again today driving, around the front of every shopping center you have, you're going to have plenty of those that people go, oh, I didn't know I could get that here. I can do that. And so I think that's part of the communication that you might be able to do, and working with some of these, your shopping center owners, not just your businesses, but also some of your shopping center owners that are going to, hopefully be participant.
Thank you.
As council pretty much covered most of my comments and questions. One thing is, and I don't know if it's going to be in your action plan and recommendations, but if you've seen anything that maybe success with the local businesses that are impacted, partnering with businesses in the north or south to try to get them to help advocate. People don't want to turn away business, but if you've seen anything that, with businesses being able to partner with businesses in other municipalities, we've talked to the chamber, they know it's coming, like what else can we do with the chamber? Just any kind of success stories or anything you've seen that's helped them that kind of level might be helpful for us too.
It will, and one of the things that as we come into the recommendations is we'll also be pulling, one of the folks on my team is really good at, he'll be pulling together some case studies that you'll be able to see that others have done. One of the things I started looking at was trying to understand who might geographically, other jurisdictions or places might be good partners for you that you could contact. So trying to understand a little bit more of that. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And then I just want to ask if there's anything that we didn't cover today, but that you think might be important, something additional to look into on this. If you think of it now, but if not, just let Jeremy know, and we'll add it to our list. If something 2 a.m. tonight pops into your head, I should have asked. Just let Jeremy know.
Be careful that happens.
Yes.
Oh, I know.
It does often.
It's about you even asked that. I did have one question.
Call him at
So
2, not me.
You did have a slide based on our demographics. You had millennials on there and different age brackets. Do you have time frames of when they were visiting? Like, do we have millennials that kind of spend time during the day, or are they kind of leaving? So I'm just thinking, because again, if businesses kind of knew what time frame the different demographics are there, they could cater maybe specials or certain ways to?
I'm not sure, I will ask the provider. That's how, the one that we had, the time of day on like the zip code of where they live, that's a new tool they just launched last week. And it was something that we were struggling with and it came across. So I'll ask him if they have the ability to segment it
A
like
detail,
that.
that'd be great. And I mean, there's common sense, like when you know kids are out of school, the ice cream man knows when he's gonna get a rush. So that's kind of where I'm thinking is how businesses can know their clientele coming and going and what they can do. Maybe they throw specials out there. I mean, maybe happy hour instead of night. So that's what I'm kind of thinking with that.
Right. Cool.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'll open the floor to public comment. Mr. Bradford?
So if I understood it correctly, we're going to lose 20% of the business traffic from key zip codes on the south side of the river.
I think the word is impact.
Potentially.
Impact, okay, yeah, that's true, because this is, where I'm going with it is this. So historically, when this consultant has done work like this, what have they experienced when we see an impact of 20%? What has the reality been since they have an alternative route that they could take? What do we actually can estimate is actually going to happen? And the other thing, his advice was to let the citizens know what's available, because they may not know. But should we also expand the distribution of our communications to places like Inlet Colony, Jupiter Island, Hobe Sound, etc., to generate additional traffic to help mitigate whatever impact we think we might realize? So some of that's for him, I guess, but I'm just asking out loud. Thank you.
Is there any you can answer now?
Sure, in terms of other communities and kind of experiencing this and this system and this data is new, fairly new. In fact, in talking with the service providers and the developers of it, this is the first time that this foot traffic data has been used for this type of analysis. One thing we did talk about with my team that we haven't really identified yet is their data does go back to 2017. So we did talk about, could we identify a place that we could go back in time and maybe take a look at and see if we saw anything? But to date, there's not. We haven't used this data before on this type of project, and actually no one has before. It is one of the reasons that it was important to monitor as the project goes along, so that we see how in your community specifically it's changing. But yeah, we'll keep looking to see if we identify something that we can actually look over time and see that impact.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other public comment?
So informal. It's a little different than what I'm used to. But fantastic presentation. I think the information is it's really great, and I appreciate the gift of knowledge and information that you guys have actually sought some outside expert help in this. So I think that's really great. I love the information. I can't wait to dig into it a little bit more. One of the things that we count on in our business is actually southbound traffic. So it didn't seem like this really addressed the commuter traffic, which is essential to some of our businesses here in the village. I love the fact that we can look at this quarterly and kind of see what is happening. I can tell you from experience, just closing those lanes on US 1 had a 15% income impact to our business on US 1. So this is a complete closure. So thinking about what does a 20% loss in a customer base mean, it's probably going to equal more than a 15% impact to a business that is on US 1. I'm hoping that we can have a little bit of control is not the right word, but some sort of influence and staying on top of DOT to make sure that what they're doing makes sense and that traffic is flowing to the south. They're using A1A to drive past Tequesta and get out, and hopefully the people that want to still come to Tequesta can still utilize A1A to come. But if the traffic is so, I mean, you saw what happened when we closed the lanes for bike lanes. That was a big impact, and we didn't close anything off. It was just kind of a nightmare, so people avoided it. So that would be my one. I mean, I love it. I love this. It gives us a lot of information, things that we can try to gather the business community to work together. If we can also mitigate that traffic side, it's going to help us out a lot. And hopefully we can all survive. Thanks.
Thanks,
Yep,
Jeremy.
thanks.
All right, any other public comment? Oh, okay, I will move on to the second agenda item. We have
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We have discussion of the preliminary draft of the Beach Road R3 design guidelines and land development code revisions. Melissa?
Yes. Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. This presentation is regarding the draft design guidelines and proposed code modifications for the Beach Road corridor. When we put together this aerial view and these 3D renderings, we felt that this captured the essence of the Beach Road corridor, a lush, welcoming, and taking advantage of the scenic charms that the corridor has. So further in the presentation, we will further explain how to achieve this, the view that we are having here in this rendering. As you all know, everything started on June 29th with the workshop that we held here in these council chambers. That was very well attended, not only here in the chambers, but also online. There was an open dialogue with residents. We listened to their vision, concerns, and ideas. So all the documents that we will see here, they were mainly based on these visions and ideas that we wrote down, took note during that June 29th workshop. Briefly, this is just a 3D renderings of the existing buildings as they look right now on the Beach Road corridor. This is the urban form of the corridor, and as we all know, there is a very active redevelopment process now in the corridor. Just to go over the main ideas of these design guidelines is basically is paying attention to what's happening right now on the corridor. It's evolving, there is a lot of redevelopment, and with that come challenges such as zoning regulations, architecture design, and environmental concerns. The main goal idea is to embrace our Tequesta small village way of life, the urban character, and scenic charm. So in June 29th, we spent considerable time explaining the requirements of the R3 district. Is maximum 12 dwelling units per acre, the density, and the height is 11 stories or 101 feet maximum. Also, this slide shows all the existing buildings and shows that they are aging. There are buildings from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So the purpose of this presentation is to go through the design guidelines that was part of the package. These design guidelines were uploaded to and they are public records. I'm sure you all have seen it.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? We couldn't understand it back
Yes.
here.
These design guidelines were uploaded and they are part of the website. I'm sure you have seen it, download it, look at it.
It wasn't an easy task. I couldn't get to it.
Well, that's the reason this is a workshop. This is a draft, so we are here to make a presentation. This is more than 50 pages, and obviously this PowerPoint will summarize and highlight the main sections of this proposed document. The main objective was, and I bolded those keywords. This document is supporting, encouraging, is to ensure compatibility with the built and natural environment. Also, number 5, to communicate clearly the aesthetics goal to developers early on in the design phase. I think communication is paramount, so developers from day one, when they are entertaining ideas, they will have now a document that they can put the hat on it, and they will understand clearly what is the goal of the village. So if you see the document, the page 6 of this document clearly shows this photo and with that big cross, because as a small village, as a charming village, we do not want this type of commercial, this type of aesthetics, because this reminds us commercial corridors, a line of hotels. That is not what is on the vision of the Beach Road corridor. So that is very clear on this document. Sometimes, I always think sometimes it's easy to say what we don't want than all the things that we do want. So the document includes these 4 main categories: building design, site planning, landscaping, and public streetscape, and provide specific guidelines for all those categories. With regard to building design, as we talked already on the June 29th workshop, the guidelines include building height and massing, step backs, articulations, building colors, materials, and green building design. Okay, height and massing. Height and massing are the key to the design. All the team meeting, they meet and they discuss what is the code, what that code requires. And also it's key to provide the human scale of the building toward the neighborhoods. So, for example, this massing here, it shows, and the guidelines speak and gives many examples and references how to break that blockish looking. In this case, on the right, we have 3 different volumes, and then and they are all interconnected. So that is something that it can be done under our code. We also provide a number of references with regard to step backs. And there are many examples on the guidelines with regard to this. Articulations. Articulations are paramount. The buildings must provide the top, the middle, and the ground articulation, and also the fenestration. When we say top articulations, it could be many ways. For example, there could be different heights, different parapet, different type of materials, or even to have a green roof at the top. Middle articulation, here is where we have the different type of windows, doors, balconies, different type of materials. The building, this is an 11-floor building, so it's tall, and the middle articulation must provide aesthetic to the building. The same way, the ground articulation, that is where the site, the building is based on the site area. So the ground articulation is very important for the building. And again, we are talking about 11-floor buildings. So the ground articulation must present a pleasing aesthetic. It could be with openings, fenestration, colors, materials. Okay, when we talk about fenestration, we are referring to windows, doors, skylines, and they can be achieved in many different ways. But through this design guideline, the developer will have to provide different type of fenestrations. This is just another examples of fenestration that can be achieved. Building and materials. Again, let's always remember we are village of Tequesta. So, and that's important when buildings come, when developers come to propose. So they have to have into consideration the different type of materials that will portray the identity of our village. The same with material and colors. The design guidelines speak specifically about that there should be primary building colors and secondary building colors and what for they are, because they truly assist with the articulation with the human scale of the building. One second. We are also proposing some coastal colors there as part of the design guidelines. Green building design. At this moment, it will be impossible to even think about a design guideline without incorporating green building. So this is extremely important, and as we have our comprehensive plan that strongly suggests that the village in the future should consider having a green code. And this could be a starting point, for example, on these design guidelines. Let's talk about the second category, site planning. First was building design. Second, site planning. Site planning includes those 6 elements: building orientation, vehicular access and parking, open space, refuse and loading, signage and lighting, compatibility and transition. This is the site plan of that previous building that we showed at the beginning. I strongly believe that building orientation, height, and massing are the key components when designing a building. How are you going to orient your building? What's gonna be the height? What's gonna be the massing? Because that also is intrinsically related to a green building, to take advantage of the sun or not, at what time, which time of the year. So when it comes to access and parking, the design guidelines include specific criteria: driveways, landscape buffers, garage parking, and definitely guest and maintenance parking. When we arrive to the proposed code language, we have a specific proposal for guest parking. Open space also. And this is also, when we talk about open space, not necessarily is a ground level. It could be a rooftop. It could be many different ways. And especially when we talk about green buildings, it's highly encouraged to have a green roof. Again, refuse loading, signage, and lighting. The design guideline proposes specifics with regard to these items. Compatibility and transition. The more than 50-page document discourages completely boxy architectural forms and definitely support human scale, respect for the environment. So this is also it's on page 39 of the document. Landscaping. We all love landscaping, and it's essential for our site planning and for the lush, welcoming corridor that we envision, that we all envision. Landscaping includes landscape buffers, foundation plantings, plant palette. This design guideline is proposing to increase the landscape buffers. For example, right now the landscape buffer on the site is only 5 feet, so we are definitely proposed here, and when we talk about the code, we will get more into details. Also is proposing foundation plantings. and the buffer areas. Especially buffer areas are extremely important because we are talking about tall buildings. So we need that more buffer in between buildings to buildings and toward the corridor. So the document also presents a long list of specific plans palette. Public streetscape. From the beginning, we always talk about a welcoming pedestrian-oriented corridor. So and we know that one side of the corridor has a sidewalk and the other doesn't. So we are encouraging the side that has the sidewalk already to work more with developers to offer some type of amenities on the sidewalk. So, for example, shade trees and benches along the sidewalk, meandering sidewalks, also some trash cans. We are also proposing more shade trees, so it will be more comfortable and more pleasant to walk. Even, we have to see that, but maybe even some bike racks that can be located there. Landscape and lighting, obviously we have to be very much in conformance with the lighting regulation because this is a beach area, the Turtle. So we also review that and we have a specific language in page 47 of the report. And this is a conceptual section. So if you see the one side is the intracoastal, and then we have our beach road corridor, and then on the other side is the beach, and Sarah drew a beautiful turtle there. So, and you see one side, we have the sidewalk with more trees, more amenities. And as I mentioned, as we were working through this design guideline, we focus on this welcoming large pedestrian corridor, which is residential. This is not a commercial, it's residential and needs to provide that essence. So when we arrive to page 50, this document has a checklist. And we strongly believe that that checklist is very important. Why? Because this checklist will be a document that the developer needs to provide and needs to complete. So let me just, Lori is providing, it's part of the document, but I wanted to further discuss that and gather also later on your opinion. So we just put on the slide only one because it's a long checklist. So, but if you see, the top is the proposed development includes the following. So, and then we break it down following the design guidelines into building design, height and massing, articulations, and the developer needs to explain how is this achieved. So, up to now, we don't have this tool in our toolbox. We don't. So these checklists and these design guidelines will be really, I think it will be a big contribution for developers when come to the village. So I just want to go back to this. But the checklist is part of the design guidelines. So the developer needs to read and understand this design guideline and later provide the fill up this checklist. So that is in terms of the design guideline. Now I would like to go briefly about the proposed code changes that are also part of this document. When we talk specifically about code, we had we work with our village attorney, and we already figured out that we need to add a definition of design guidelines to our definition section. Also, we are incorporating some guidelines into the R3 R3 district. So right now, we don't have a language in the R3 district that asks for massing, breaking down, and all of that. We don't. So we need to include some language in code that, depending on this workshop tonight, that will actually request from the developer to provide that more interesting building. So with regard to guest and visitor parking, the code that we are proposing is saying that provide half a parking space for the first 20 residential units and a quarter of a space for any additional units above 20. So basically, let's have an example. If a developer is proposing 30 units, for the first 20 units, they need to provide 10 spaces for guest parking, and then for the additional, 2.5. So the total spaces for guest parking or maintenance will be 12 parking spaces. So obviously, the code right now requires 2 spaces per unit, but that's for the owner. But right now, our code does not request any guest parking or maintenance, so this is extremely important. Again, based on the workshop that we had on June 29th. Also, we are proposing, if you see there on red, that is the coastal construction control line that was from 1979. So right now, our code does not request any separation from that CCL line. So we are proposing it could be 5 or 10 feet from that line. We did extensive research. We look at other municipalities. We did so that is for discussion. Because basically, right now, all the buildings that are being proposed, they go right up to the line, and there is no almost room for plantings, for, buffering. So with regard to the landscaping code, there are several modifications that we are proposing. Mr. Steve Parker, he has been contributing and assisting the village for many years. So these are proposals that he suggested. He's the landscape architect. He reviewed all what is the foundation planting requirements, also the landscape buffer. And right there says, add language to provide 15-foot front landscape buffer instead of 10 feet. So right now, the developer only needs to provide 10 feet landscape buffer toward the corridor. So right now, and then based on this, we are proposing to increase that, to give that welcoming large corridor vision. So, and then also, provide a 10-foot side landscape buffer rather than 5 feet. The code right now only requires 5 feet buffer on the side areas. No setbacks, I'm just talking landscape buffer. Setback is 20, but from that 20, only 5 feet landscaping, which we are proposing to increase to 10. And also right now, the code is not clear at all with regard to landscape buffer toward the rear, toward the beach, or toward the intracoastal. So by brainstorming and talking, discussing with Mr. Parker, we are proposing that it should be at least 40%. If you have a site, 40% of that site should be landscaping toward the rear, because you also don't want to buffer too much that you lose the views of the ocean or the intracoastal. So we are not asking a complete landscape buffer, but at least 40% should be with a landscape buffer. So our next steps is tonight is the first workshop was on June 29. Tonight is the second workshop where we are proposing these guidelines and code language. So, and then, according to our original timeline, we would like to do the local planning agency in November, then first reading in December, and second reading in January, as start at the beginning. And this is just if any of our residents would like to email us or call us, please.
Take a picture.
All right, thank you, Nelsa.
I have a couple questions.
Okay, I'm gonna open it to council comment first, and then we'll take public comment. Council comment?
I guess I'll go. All right, so slide 6, when I originally opened up the entire packet that we got, which was huge, but thank you, because it was chock full of lots of good stuff. But slide 6 is my favorite.
Okay.
In my opinion, I think that should be in something that's handed to developers, so they just flat out know that we don't want
Red X.
boxes. We want something that is charming and creative and something that's unique. We don't want to look like everybody else.
This one.
Yes, that is my favorite, with the big
Yes.
X.
I agree.
I saw that and I'm like, yes.
Yes.
Because I do agree with you. I think sometimes it's helpful if we say out loud what we don't like so that they know what to stay away from, but then can give us creative suggestions on what we might like. The other things I like word-wise are articulation. You know, I love details on buildings. It brings character and uniqueness to any kind of architecture. I am excited to see creativity from developers. Again, we don't want to look like the 80s. We don't want to look like box buildings. We want to see what you can come up with. There's so many great elements in the world, design-wise, pulled from all different types of inspirations. But we do want to make sure that it's not too out there. I am a fan of tiered roof lines. I think it helps break up a building, and whether or not you go outward with a building to make up for your density that you need or vice versa, but I think it just helps break up a visual for anyone that's driving the road as well as on the waterway. I do really want to see us somehow put, not a requirement, but a strong suggestion to developers, movement in a building, because I think that's what really helps prevent boxy buildings. So if they had something on the checklist that said, where's a piece of movement, whether it's a curve to the building or the building has been broken up in pieces, or if it's just got some creativeness with the balconies, where is some movement, and using that keyword, and then let them come up with it with their design wise. You know, they're designing something that they want to make. I get that. It's their creativity. We're not here to tell them how to design it. We just want to give them those keywords that'll keep us from getting box buildings. The colors, I mean, thank you for not giving us colors like Riviera Beach has in that mustard and ketchup building. I know we definitely don't want that. I know they painted that because they said it was sunsetty, but I used to live over there. For colors, I would prefer nice neutral, those colors that were presented, but maybe one step down. So we're not getting too many blues, pinks, and yellows. Signage and lighting. I wanted to ask you about signage and lighting. I know inside the village, we're not supposed to have neon or backlit. So does that go for R3 as well?
The design guideline is very general.
Okay.
So, I mean, the code for signage, we might need to further clarify that on the
Okay.
code.
Okay, because I know some people in the village have tried to do the backlit, and that's not in our code, so it becomes an issue. And then you might get the condo buildings that want to do the monument sign with like neon green behind the lettering. So that's why I'm asking, so we can clarify that.
Yeah, right now, all the signs on that district, they usually have the lighting in the front
It's
and then.
subdued, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
very subdued, and especially because it's the beach area.
Okay. You mentioned open space on top of rooftops. While I'm not opposed to somebody using space on top of a rooftop for a creative way, would that go towards the 30% open space?
No,
Okay, so that's just an
that's
additional.
completely different.
Okay, I like hearing that, thank you. Landscape buffers, I do think they could be bigger. Mostly because the more landscape you put in there, it'll help absorb sounds as well, whether it's the
Yes.
vehicle sounds are the echoing off the sides of the buildings. Tree sizes, do we have a specific, not one size, but do we have a required range of sizes that must be planted at the beginning?
We do, however, it was very minimal. So, and because usually the developer said, well, the tree will grow. Yes, we know that, but we would like certain size from the beginning. So Mr. Parker have reviewed that and basically make it more robust, you know, better.
Because I know that can be challenging when you're purchasing a tree, especially if you're doing an oak or something, but I didn't know if we should put in like a range so we don't get a ton of trees that are 3 feet tall or...
We're gonna look into it
That's what I'm
because
just
Mr.
asking.
Parker is very specific about the trees. So
I know,
we are
I
taking
did have a
notes.
chat with
The
him.
team is taking notes.
Okay. Landscape lighting, when you had the slide with the different posts, are we gonna have a requirement that has, where they have to dim it during turtle nesting season or shut off completely?
The code with regard to the turtle is very specific.
Okay.
So, and that is being, is reviewed and approved by the Florida Wildlife and FDP and all of that.
Because I'm sure out by the pool side, which is usually on the ocean side, they want to have some sort of pool lighting. I didn't know if we were going.
No, that is very
perfect.
well reviewed during the building permitting phase, all the lighting that could go there.
Good, okay. Yeah, so again, I'm really big fan of heavier landscaping because the more dense you make it, it's environmentally beneficial, it's good for mental health, it's beautifully aesthetically pleasing to the area and the property that it's going on, and our code does allow for quite tall buildings, so if anything, let's make up for it where we can.
Yes.
And guest parking, if we were to have the code changed to where we did for the after 20 units, it went down. Is it possible if guest parking was needed after that to have it outside but in a green aspect, have green parking? So it's, looks like it's part of the yard essentially, but it could be used as parking if needed, let's say during the holiday time or something, just something to think about.
Well, now there are so many new materials that, it could be a pervious, instead of being impervious, it could be definitely pervious. And that is when I'm talking about making our zoning code greener, Our zoning code is from the 70s and 80s, pretty much, So right now, we have a very updated comprehensive plan. The code is not updated. So, and I think at some point we need to really roll our sleeves and with regard, for example, parking. On the parking section of the code, we can actually put the more state-of-the-art materials, green materials that could also be pervious. Right now the codes that have to be concrete, for example, for some of those areas. So it's
I just want to throw that out there, just to think about it.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I had.
All right, hats off, gorgeous presentation. I don't want to, I'm not attacking you, but
Okay.
you mentioned developers and, I don't want to tell them what I want, and then you told us 70 things that you want. And I feel like we can all, that's going to happen, and I don't want that to happen. I'm not going to do that. I look at this as a wish list. Hey, that would be nice, but I didn't go to school for this. I'm not an architect. So I like those, but I want to be careful about what we tell, how we approach this. Like for instance, the landscape buffer, 5 feet, is that what it was?
It's 10.
10, and we want to add 5 feet to that.
On the side, right now, it's only 5 feet.
Right.
On the side, and we are just adding 5 more, 10,
Yeah, 5 feet sounds like, I don't know what research, how that was investigated to come up with 5. It's probably arbitrary. And
It was
adding another
years
5
ago.
would probably
That
be
was years
arbitrary
ago,
too. That's my
exactly.
point, like, I don't want to just start adding things just to, arbitrarily. If it's 10 feet, why not 15? Why not 25? You know what I mean? Like at some point, there really needs to be a really solid reason backed by something as opposed to, I'd like to see more trees, which brings up another point. You start adding layers and layers of more trees, one, and you want to get trees that are already matured, very expensive to the developer, and which is going to be passed on to those who live there. Maintenance is going to be much more expensive too, so those are things to think about as well. I don't want to talk about what colors I like and, you know, my favorite types of buildings over the years that have been built. So, you know, like I said, gorgeous presentation. I like every single one of those buildings. I think it would be fantastic to drive down Beach Road and see buildings that were on that TV. But again, I don't know where we draw the line from wish list to, hey, here's what you need to do. And I don't think we've figured that out yet. That's all.
Thank you.
I just want to thank the council and the staff of the Village of Tequesta. This didn't just happen in the last couple of days. I mean, we've been talking about this for over 2 years. And this past year, we passed the budget for this presentation and the next one tonight. I mean, it's cost us, the residents, over $100,000 to put that all together. So we're taking this very seriously and taking it to, I think, a very high level. That's not easy for any of us to figure out, because design and structure is one opinion versus another. And to how do you get it just right is really including the whole community. And I think we've done a very good job of that on this presentation and the next. And I think you did an excellent job. And I look forward to hearing more from the residents and continue this process and getting something in the code and in the recommendation like you had earlier for the guideline checklist. I think it's brilliant, and I look forward to getting all this implemented.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And I think the code changes, there weren't too many code changes. A lot of this is the guidelines checklist, which is more like a wish list, right? We're not gonna be able to really enforce this guideline checklist, correct?
The design guidelines will be part of the code. We are planning to adopt, once the council decides, we are going to adopt a design guideline, and it will be part of the code. It will be as reference. Keith Davis and us already spoke about it. Yes, the design guideline will be part of the code
so the
as reference.
specifics you showed, and then as well as this, is gonna be part of the code.
Excuse me?
I don't know if you can pull up the
This
slide.
is
You
the
had some
design
really-
guideline.
Yeah.
More than 50 pages. This will be part of the code.
Okay, because you had some really specific code changes up there, so that's why I wanted to
Yeah,
clarify between
there
the
are
two.
two different things, yes. There will be one part on the code that will say, developer shall comply with design guidelines adopted such and such by ordinance by reference. Then, there will be specific parts of the code. For example, the definition. We're gonna include a definition of design guideline. On the landscape section, we're gonna include those specific requirements. In the parking section of the code, we will include a specific language. So they are two things coming together.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And just some minor comments. I kind of along with the paint colors. So when I looked at the material recommendations, you had slate was up there, which was it's a really darker, it's a dark gray usually, and I think some of the paint colors didn't complement it. So maybe just revisit the paint colors and then the materials you had on there. And then I like having the green building standards in there. I think that's great. I do know Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council also had green building recommendations. I personally think that those should align, so I don't know that I like having them so different between the two plans. I know they're different districts and zones, but at the end of the day, I think for any green building recommendations, that should really be aligned. And then also, if that's, again, it's more of a suggestion, if it's something like council and we really want to, really enforce a lot of that, you have to incentivize it, right? So I know like Orlando has incentives to developers to do green building. So my personal opinion is a green building should maybe be looked at a little more as a whole and not independently between the two. All the plans listed in the guidelines, I'm assuming that the landscape consultant reviewed those, or
Yes.
did he provide those?
Yes.
Okay. And
They
they're
were
all-
provided by Mr. Parker.
Yeah.
No, all the landscape section belongs to him. He's the author.
Okay, and those are all like Florida friendly?
Yes.
Native and all that good stuff? Okay. The corridor and pedestrian path, I loved it. It's beautiful. That would be an amazing improvement. But if it's kind of more of a recommendation and guideline, if one developer goes all in and puts a bunch of trees and amenities and a developer next to it doesn't want to, how do you make it not look like an incomplete path?
Well, that's exactly is the next step. After we do this, we really would like to engage Mr. Parker because he and us, we work very close together. And that was exactly our same thing. We really need to have a specific drawing. And it's not too long or anything, a specific drawing for that as a sidewalk and the type of street that we want and all of that. So that will be something that I'm hoping we could start this next fiscal year. So we have to have that plan of that area of that corridor, you know. So when a developer comes, we will say, okay, this is your portion and this is the way we would like to have it. You know, it's very important.
Okay. And then on the checklist, and I know, because some of the comments that Councilmember Johnson made is correct. I mean, there's a fine line with, like, you know, it is true. You ask for all big mature trees. That's a, you know, big cost impact for the developer. So you want it, you know, this is a guideline. We want it broad. We're not directing to the T what they should be doing. But some of them were just really broad for me, like the fenestration, the windows and glazed areas. To me, and how it was described in the pamphlet, maybe some better examples of that, because I just felt it was really broad and just up to the eye of the beholder still.
You exactly point out a very important, because this, again, if somebody just grab the checklist and read only the checklist, they need to read the document. So in the document, we truly explain what is fenestration, what type of fenestration. So the checklist is just like a summary, and it's a tool for the developer to provide how they are doing. But if somebody just grab the checklist, then yes, you are right. Then it will fall short. So that's the part that I'm assuming, because now we have this document, that they will read and comply.
Yeah, and I did read the whole guideline, and it felt a little broad still in the guideline to me. So maybe some of those, like the fenestration,
more examples.
the glazing, yeah, they just seem could be very eye of the beholder. And again, you don't want to direct exactly what they should do, but maybe just a little more guidance there. And then I think a lot of the visual elements you had were really great, and they were spot on for providing a visual for what you were explaining. But I think some of them maybe were buildings that, that would not fit on Beach Road. So I don't know if maybe some more illustrations of buildings that explain, are a good visual of what you're explaining that maybe would be more likely to see on Beach Road. So maybe just revisiting some of the visuals. I think the visuals are great. I mean, it's the best way. I love pictures. It's the best way to really understand what you're describing.
Yes, you are absolutely right. Some of those buildings are in other countries and other continents even.
Yeah.
So because we really were trying to strive for creativity, imagination, not just, we didn't want to go just to Miami area or, Delray Beach or something. I mean, we are really trying to trigger the imagination and creativity of the developers. But we will include also buildings more local.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And great job. And yeah, to echo what the Vice Mayor said, I mean, it's so exciting to be at this point with you and Treasure Coast because we've put so much time and energy in it, and it's gonna. I mean, these both are gonna be really huge assets for the village going forward.
For a long time.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yes. We are also looking forward for some guidance from council, because I put there the next steps. I'm not sure if council will ask to move forward pursuing those next steps, November, December, January, or, so we are just here taking notes.
So when you meet with planning and zoning next, are you going to, because that's the next meeting, right?
Yes, that will be the LPA,
The
Local
LPA,
Planning
sorry, yeah.
Agency.
So are you gonna, is it gonna be the same presentation, or are you gonna take some feedback you got tonight? Because we still have to do public comments, we might get some good feedback there too.
No, definitely, we are taking notes, we are going to change. This is a draft, so based on this workshop, we are going to make adjustments. And then we'll work with our legal counsel to zero in the wording for the code amendments. Once we have that, we need to start the process, the local planning agency, November and then December, because that was the original timeline. I am not sure if we are still following the original timeline.
Okay. All right, thank you, Nelsa.
Thank you.
All right, I'll open for public comment. Do you have cards? Okay.
I have a card. Michael Rutledge.
Hi, I'm Michael Rutledge, and I'm a resident of Tequesta. I thought Nelsa did a great job. It really enlightened me on seeing what Beach Road Corridor could be and what it should be looking like, because, I mean, we live in a really great community. There's a lot of moneyed people that are in this community as well, so I think that that would be a really nice change, and I really like the look of that. I guess my biggest question on it would be, though, if you have all these existing buildings, and really we only have 2 properties that have been purchased by a developer that would have those really pretty trees and that landscaping. But what about all the other older buildings that, I mean, is it going to be, are you going to enforce that the other buildings have to spend the money themselves to do that, to comply? Because it's going to look a little funny to just have a certain section of 2 addresses with that beautiful landscaping. And I guess I would also wonder how we were going to water that, what the proposal is for the irrigation. But other than that, I think it's great. I think it's a great thing that the developers, changing the look of Jupiter Island. It's about time. A lot of our buildings are old, and frankly, we're getting pretty ugly. So I'm sure that the council here and everybody will, keep a good eye on that to make sure that we keep the ball rolling with re-beautification of the corridor and the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I meant to ask that also, what we're going to do with existing buildings. Because there are many more existing buildings than there are going to be redeveloped buildings, and that's a great question. That just slipped my mind.
So maybe address remodels, or if they do exterior facade upgrades for existing buildings too. I mean, would they?
He was referring to the landscaping, to the large landscaping. So I think he was referring to the part of the streetscape and all of that. That could be part of the program for a streetscape, because that is the part of the right of way. So obviously, if the existing buildings want to do something in their own property, they want to put more landscaping and all that, but I don't think that would be, the intent was to mandate to the existing buildings, so this is more for the new developments, but that's gonna be up to the village council.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm a resident, not a developer, but I have 2 stupid questions and 1 suggestion. Let's assume I wanted to build a 20-story building. Is there a limit on how high I can make that building?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second question is,
I'm sorry, sir. Can you state your name for the record?
Gene Kopf, K-O-P-F.
Thank you.
And the second question is, if I build that building, can I use, and I build it on the east side, can I use part of the other side of the street, knock down some trees and put some parking lot there? Because, I mean, that was what's happening 2 months ago. If you looked across the street, cars were parked where the building was. So now I can't park across the street, right? I have to park just on my side?
Address the council.
Didn't you drive by and see what was
Sir.
going
Hey,
on?
sir, I think we can, we can have staff look into that. I know unless they own the property across the street, that can't happen.
That's why I would hope it couldn't happen.
Yeah.
And then the third thing I have is just a simple suggestion, if you're really looking at helping bikers, and I'm not a biker, but when you come from Route 1 to Beach Road, before you get to the bridge, you have all that grass on both sides. Why don't we just take and make bicycle paths on that grass on each side, so I won't have to almost run over those people when they're going? It's very simple. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica Namath.
Hello, Jessica Namath, 20 Shady Lane, and I just wanted to say thank you. I thought that presentation was phenomenal, and like you said, I think it's very exciting that we've gotten this far, and I think that the checklist just highlights, you know, what we needed. You know, the fact that they had free reign, and now we actually are able. I disagree with you saying that we shouldn't give them too many things, because I think it's our village, and I think that to a certain extent we should decide what it looks like, and we can lay the parameters down for the developers, and they should follow. You know, I mean, it's our vision that I think should be that, you know, what the people have told you that they like. So I strongly disagree with you, unfortunately, on that, and saying that we shouldn't be too specific, because I think that they have enough leniency with everything else. I was wondering if the checklist could include any environmental impacts and make sure developers are taking the necessary steps to protect the natural environment, maybe, or see if they're following up on any of the things that may be impacted. Which kind of brought me to staging too. I know that the sea glass staging was out of our control, but I wasn't sure if there was anything that could be put in or done to prevent what's happened in the future, because there are a lot of buildings there. I thought it was great about the guest parking, because had that been outlined, I remember at the last meeting with the 250, I think it was, that was an issue, so I thought that was great. Certainly support moving the control line back 5 feet, if that's something, you know, as a municipality, we aren't able, and I believe Mr. Bradford can clarify this for me, we aren't able to make it more lax, but we can make it stricter. So if we have the opportunity to do so, I think we're all well aware that 1979 is out of date in terms of sea level rise and everything else. So I certainly think that that would be fantastic. Obviously a fan of the increased landscape buffer, and I love that idea and suggestion, and that we're including and encouraging native species. And then also just wanted to agree and touch on what you had said about the pictures. I'm glad that we didn't source from Miami and Delray, because I definitely don't think that that's the direction that the village wants to move. I would have loved to see some pictures compared to much smaller kind of classic beach towns that might have a beach similar to us, where they have had to develop higher, but with a smaller kind of coastal community behind it, one that's not as developed as some of the buildings that we may be seeing, or other places that may be more tourist driven, because this is our little village here. But I just, again, wanted to say what a wonderful job, and I'm so happy to have seen that we've got some sort of a guideline. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Scott, please.
No,
Nope.
Lori, yeah, you can go. Did you fill out a card? You should fill out a card. We'll go through the cards first at least, so.
So my name is Scott Meese. I live at Island House Northeast, just adjacent to the Pergo development. This is sort of new for us, so I'm a little behind the times, just sort of seeking to understand a little bit. And first, I'd like to say thank you to the council, the mayor, the vice mayor, spending all the time on these things. I didn't realize how much time you invested in these things. Thank you very much. I think it was a very important point, I think Mr. Johnson and Mayor Young made, relating to the code versus the guidelines. I think it's important to clarify what's enforceable and what's not. Nice to haves are fine, but if you incorporate great presentation, but 50 pages into a code that is enforceable, that's a little dangerous. I think Mr. Johnson made a really good point about being careful about what's there right now. Living in Island House Northeast, we don't have a lot of space. So if you start taking 5 feet, 10 feet here and there, you really can't do very much. I mean, I just like to plant some plants there, and I can't do that. So I think we should be very careful. And that brings me into another point about grandfathering. I'm assuming that, and I maybe missed some of the discussion, that the existing buildings are grandfathered, but I'd like to ask that question. Maybe I ask it right now. Is that the intent?
Yeah, that was kind of my question, is I don't know that we commented. Obviously, existing buildings are grandfathered, but if they make remodels or like exterior facade improvements, are they still grandfathered in, or would they have to then follow our guidelines?
It's a new site plan.
We have a specific code criteria that I can provide you, because yes, there is some kind of percentage or value if you modify your
That's right,
non-conforming
yeah.
building more than X amount or X percentage, then yes, you need to bring it up to code. But if you are just doing like the cosmetics and stuff like that, you know, so I can provide more specific code language.
That'd be great, thank you.
So
It's a
I'm
lot.
cognizant, thank you very much. I'm cognizant of the time, but I have to tell you that grandfathering would be very important to us. And more generally, I think grandfathering is important. If you think about, we get hit by a hurricane, God forbid, you know, we have to do something different. What if part of the building is condemned and we have to drop the thing? So if we move the setbacks back one way and then the more foliage the other way, we really don't have any place to build. So I think that's a very big concern. I'd be very careful about that. I think the other thing to say, on behalf of the unit owners at Island House Northeast, I would say that, you know, the value of the property also drops when you say that you have to comply with all these new requirements and codes, and perhaps a developer doesn't want to buy your property. And with the 11 seconds left, I will ask one more question. If I can find my notes. I ran out of time, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And just for the record, because I do want this on record, Keith has reviewed all of the guidelines, correct, Keith? And is there anything that has us infringing on private property rights? Because we're all very conscious of that. And
My opinion is this is a good set of guidelines. I think they're defensible. Is to say somebody might not push back, but what I've seen, in my opinion, is defensible. And you know, just to expand a little bit, I don't want to take up too much time, but as Nilsa's presentation showed, the concept is there will be certain things put into the code, and those would be hard requirements. For example, the parking. Okay, you're going to have this much parking and do it this way. That would be a hard requirement that would have to be met. The concept would be that the development guidelines would be incorporated by reference, and the code would say, developer, you have to adhere to or comply with or use the design guidelines, and then we have the checklist. But there will be many ways to arguably meet the design guidelines. It's not like you have to do this or you have to do that. The developer will have an opportunity to say, we believe we have met this guideline by doing this. We believe we've met that guideline by doing that. By putting these two things together, we think we've also met this. So that piece of it is much more fluid. You know, it's really, our current code, you have some extremely subjective and very basic architectural and aesthetic criteria in Chapter 22, where it talks about, it shouldn't be garish in color or design. It shouldn't be too similar or too dissimilar. That's all we have. These guidelines really are an attempt to expand on that, provide, as Nilsa said, and you've all seen, some examples of ways to meet different things, but none of that is, you don't have to build your building to look like that one. You don't have to use that material that's in the list of example materials. It still leaves it open for creativity, but at the same time, there is now a checklist and these guidelines for them to look to and show not only the Development Review Committee and the Planning and Zoning Board, but also this council, here's what we have done, in our opinion, to meet the guidelines that you have adopted.
But doesn't leaving it open to creativity also leave it open to subjectivity? I think as a developer, I met that, and you go, no, you didn't.
Of course, it does. And I don't know how you get around that. It is at least, I think, a step in the right direction compared to what you have right now.
Okay.
So,
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Mr. Bradford? We'll get to you, I promise.
Tom Bradford, 44 Chestnut Trail, Tequesta. I did not know that that document was going to be presented tonight, and I'm pleasantly surprised. I feel like that guy on America's Got Talent, the British guy, Simon something, when a star is born right there in front of him and he goes, OMG, this is what I've been talking about. This is what I've been talking about. This fantastic job, well done. It's long overdue. I had to constrain myself to just jump up and say, finally, that somebody's done this. It's fantastic. What I want to say is, number one, the beautiful drawings that we saw for Beach Road, particularly as it did the curve with the landscaping and so forth, that's all fantastic, but it won't look that good if you keep the overhead power lines there. Something needs to be stated in this document that they should ultimately be buried because it's ugly. And secondly, it's got Cobra head streetlights. This is what you put on I-95. This is a residential area. It is not a highway. And it's something that needs to be done for that sort of infrastructure. And I'd like to say that I think it's been my experience over the 40 years in Florida that whenever you get a bad hurricane like we've just gone through, that suddenly undergrounding through state initiatives and discounts at FPL and the Public Service Commission, they start to happen again. And there's a lot going on right now for undergrounding, and I think you need to say something so that you can set the stage to get rid of those overhead lines. There's not that many of them because it's not a long distance, if and when the time comes and some sort of circumstance presents itself so that you can save big bucks in doing it. So those are my comments, so thank you very much, finally.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford.
Patty Crisafulli?
Hi, I'm Patty Crisafulli. I live at 375 Beach Road. And I was at the June 29th workshop, and I can't thank you enough for that night. And also for all of the emails you've returned, not only from me, but from John Griffiths in our building, Molly, thank you, the other councilman. It's really felt good to be involved and to feel like you had a little bit of a voice in all this. My takeaway from the June 29th workshop was that the codes that you reviewed really were outdated and needed to be changed. And I feel like you've done some of that. All due respect, I don't agree with Mr. Johnson. That I think that the new codes, the new guidelines should be as strict as possible, because I feel that we already have things that we don't feel are that good. So we need to develop new codes and new guidelines that are really effective. And these developers are not building low-income housing, okay? They're building multi-million-dollar buildings, and they're going to make millions of dollars. I don't think we should be too concerned about the price of a tree that we're asking them to put in, because they're going to make a lot of money. And so I would really like to see the council support strong codes and really make things that can be enforceable. And I don't agree with the gentleman who said our end of Jupiter Island is ugly. I don't know where he lives, but I look out my window every day and find it beautiful. So I think that there are buildings that probably could use a little upkeep or whatever, and it would be nice to have that landscaping all along the way. But I think we can figure that out as we go. So again, just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
C. Hewitt?
Yes.
Now I get to speak. Thank you. I think your guidelines are an excellent step at the beginning, and I agree with Aaron. Every community in Florida suffers from interpolation or interpreting their guidelines. I think these guidelines need a lot more detail. You're a barrier reef island, you have winds, rooftop will not work. You can't have greenery and rooftops on a barrier reef island. You have limited space for your hiker-biker paths, and I'm sorry, I have a sore throat. So I think there are a lot of details. You have 12 units per acre, you have a height restriction, but you have no GBA, gross building area. I think there's a lot of detail that you need to put in your guidelines. You've done a great job, but there's a lot of detail if you want to come out. Renderings are nice, but they're not what's gonna be at the end of the day. So I highly encourage you. I think it's an aggressive calendar to get this done by December with the review. Fenestration is gonna be a big issue on the island. I remember the Hancock building in Boston. They missed the fenestration, took out the whole building. So I think you've got a lot of pieces that need to be addressed. And I hope you do that before you approve these guidelines. And I'm so sorry about my throat. So, and I think grandfathering is a big issue as well, and the power line. So it compounds, but this is the opportunity to get what you want. And I hope you take that into account as a council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? No? All right. I will move on to the next agenda item. Thank you, everyone. All right, last but not least, we review and discuss the Village of Tequesta Draft Commercial Quarter Master Plan. Dana, you are up.
It's nice to be able to clear the room. Good evening. Thank you very much, Mayor, Vice Mayor in a moment, and council members, Brandon and Johnson. It's good to see you again. My name is Dana Little, and I'm the Urban Design Director for the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. And many of you may know that in April we were here and we conducted a 5-day-long public charrette in this room. Our objective is different than, say, Nielsen and her team's objective was. We were to take in a fire hose of information from the community about lots of different issues and ideas and images and architecture and fixing this intersection or that intersection and how do we finish the Main Street at Paradise Park, etc. So what I'm doing tonight is not presented. We had our intimate workshop back in August. And I got a lot of good information from the council. And if you have not seen that presentation, your village is very good about putting these presentations online, so you can see it there. I've trimmed this down, though, quite a bit this evening to try to focus on the issues that I heard from you all, to try to take a lot of the imagery, a lot of the design concepts, and bring them closer to being code. And don't worry, the code versus design guidelines discussion carries on healthily in every single community across the country. Where those two intersect, that Venn diagram is very tricky. So,
Down is up.
oh, down is up, I'm sorry. So tonight I'm presenting the revised draft plan. Hope to get a little bit of input and find out what we've still missed and what we still need to address. As I said, I was here on August 22nd when we presented the first draft of the plan, and we got a lot of good input. The plan itself, the master plan that we developed during the charrette and is in the original draft, identifies 12 different very specific projects within the commercial corridor areas where we thought there was room to move. And what I mean by that there was possible opportunities for change over time. Some areas, you can redesign them, but they're just simply not likely to change over time. Like Publix probably isn't going anywhere. So designing a condominium on top of the Publix site doesn't really make sense. We went through, and I'm going to touch on a handful of these. Gallery Square, though, on the other hand, at some point, it's such an important piece of the community, and I'll come back to this in a moment, but the idea of that if it were to ever redevelop over time, and providing for different uses like residential, etc., that there needs to be an emphasis on public open space, a public square gathering space. That's the intersection of Tequesta Drive and Seabrook. Thank you. We talked a lot about, and we heard a lot, this is something we didn't know when we got here, the roundabout potential at the intersection of the potentially dangerous intersection of Village Parkway and North Old Dixie. And that's an idea that's been discussed in the past. We think it's important to revive it and bring it back, make it a safer intersection not only for vehicles but also pedestrians and cyclists. We had some different ideas for the FEC Linear Park, even creating a trailhead. And Councilmember Brandon, you'll be happy to know that we went back and revised this drawing so we no longer have the tower minarets that were there at the edge of the idea. But the idea is that, you know, on the south side, this is an important transition actually. We're looking south here. And so you see Old Dixie there and then Tequesta Drive and of course the railroad tracks. But this is a very, very interesting opportunity because you do have the FEC trail, but it's also really the transition from the neighborhoods into a more community or even regional destination. So anyway, just a thought. There's that interesting retention pond area over at the post office. We talked about that. Spent a lot of time discussing in the report Paradise Park or the town center, completing the town center. Came up with a series of different diagrams. Each of them, again, showing that the 30% open space that's required should not be relegated to the parking islands in the buffers, but actually be something that is usable and meaningful for the community, especially considering the history of this site. Even though the town doesn't own it, hasn't owned it, excuse me, the village, it has been a community gathering space for a long time. So the memory of that needs to be, we believe, needs to be kept. And then just some different imagery of how you can create those public open spaces, whether they be hardscape or greenscape. These are 3-story buildings, could be mixed use, residential and office, etc. But you're creating a center of town. And remind me to say center of town again, because that also came up quite a bit during the charrette. Here's just another version. There's almost an infinite number of ways that you could design this, but the key principles of lining the streets, hiding the parking, and having open space is very important. Bridge Road. Bridge Road is a very important road for the redevelopment of the town center area. And we talked about providing bioswales, getting parking possibly on both sides, and then ultimately showing how that road can be part of the overall town center concept. We came up with some different design ideas for Fashion Mall. The Tequesta Greenway, which is kind of a long-term idea, but following Tequesta Drive all the way to the water so that you've got pedestrian access and even some green space. And then we talked about this quite a bit. You know, we heard that, you know, we, as you know, Treasure Coast, were part of the team that did the bike lanes on US 1, the lane repurposing. And what we heard a lot was, you know, whether you like it or not, you know, the complete street isn't complete. There still needs to be more there. And if we've got anything loud and clear from the village, it's that shade trees are essential. And we need to, and I'm very happy to hear this, provide as much shade as possible. So we actually took a look at this, and I'll come back to it in just a minute. So that's a very brief overview of what we talked about in depth in August. I'd like to go through now with a little bit more detail and talk about how we've refined or added to or addressed some of your comments. Here is the existing Tequesta shopping center, which I know it's a great retail destination, but it's an unbearably large parking lot. And you know, there's not a lot of room left in the right-of-way. So what this drawing suggests is that, you know, we're having a public-private partnership with the property owners, maybe requesting to take out every 5th or 7th parking space, and that turning into a tree well, so that you can start to build in a canopy along the corridor. Mr. Bradford, you brought this up, that years ago you all were doing those type of public-private partnerships with private property owners. We're seeing more and more of this, especially along some of the corridors where there's really just not the room. You know, the 5 feet of grass or 10 feet of grass, DOT's still not going to let you put in, you know, an ample shade tree. So this is having this type of tree planting program on corridors, we think is very important. In this updated document, we've also provided examples of what are Florida-friendly shade trees, those that are drought-resistant, you know, that are good for the environment, that are native to Florida, etc. So we're starting to help you build a catalog, and then this can be incorporated or segued into the design guidelines potentially as well. Keep in mind, the design guidelines, excellent job, by the way, and I think you heard that over and over, is limited to a specific area. So we're looking at larger, corridors, etc. I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but one of the comments that came through clear to me at our last workshop is you've got all these ideas, we've got some code recommendations, but we're not really tying them to the ground. How do we know where this applies and where that applies? So I'm going to come back to this. We've developed a regulating plan, and we've actually taken the liberty of breaking the area into 3 different districts, which I think is going to help us because the context changes. Civic open space, you've seen this before. You've heard me say this before. It's important to get civic open space, but we've gone further and actually provided dimensional criteria and a description of what it is. So when somebody says, hey, provide a square, the answer is just, well, what is that? There's actually a description. Each one of these has a different type of function and a different size. So there's square footage range, which I think helps. We've gone through and done some additional recommendations to the code about how to measure building height. We know it's a 4-story, 50-foot limit, but oftentimes, the measure to where buildings are measured can actually make or break the success of a building, especially like the building on the right, where a lot of times cities will measure to the mean of the roof line. We're recommending, and this is in greater detail, but measuring to locations on the facade of the building that actually matter. I presented these images before, but we've provided a more deeper description. We've had a lot of discussion about drive-throughs, particularly on the corridors, and where do we limit drive-throughs or how do we handle drive-throughs. And so these are a series of recommendations about how the architecture can conceal the drive-through. The drive-through can be at the back of the building. And the recommendation would be, not all parts of US 1 are treated the same. They're not all the same. So maybe it's okay to have drive-throughs on the very north end at county line, I don't know. But as you get closer to town center, this is where you start to tighten up those regulations. And then we've gone further to talk about where parking locations are, to get away from, and these are all recommendations for the code at some point if you desire, but where parking goes, primarily it's behind the building or to the side of the building. It is not the most prominent feature of the building, as the suburban models that we are also used to would suggest. Now again, as I said, parts of the US 1 corridor or even Old Dixie, it might be okay. The context is different, but definitely as you get into town and village center, you want to tighten up those locations. To your point, Mayor, about the green building items, I went back and reviewed quickly that we don't want to have any conflict, And Nilsa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're referring specifically to the building, the architecture itself, like LEED or something like that, a little bit. We're talking more about green stormwater infrastructure and stormwater guides and some of the more site type of stuff. So I think that working together, we could cover the whole spectrum. Like for instance, we heard about the dark sky lighting. This is important. What does that mean? What are the different types? And why would you do that? This is something that the dark sky lighting might be the type of lighting that goes on the pool deck in the new building that's on the beach. Because it addresses some of those issues that you already brought up. We provided a whole appendix of architectural design guidelines. These are not specific to the C2 corridor, of course. Some of them are even residential. When I presented them before, there was some confusion, I think, understandably, like, well, again, are we telling people that if they build a new house, it's got to be, mid-century modern, and in fact, that's not even the study area? What we're showing though, and so I provided a preamble, I think that was part of the request, is that the intent of the design guidelines is not to force or regulate specific styles. The intent is to be inspirational and educational, so that if I come to you as an applicant and I want to do a certain style, or I think I'm doing a certain style, it's an architectural resource for you, for staff, and for applicants. Some cities go a little bit further, and while I think Mr. Davis's point is that, you know, I've always struggled with the fact that you can't regulate talent. It bothers me a lot. But you can't regulate talent. You can't force somebody to be talented. Some people are less talented. So the idea is that you can nudge architects. And these styles, most of them, are applicable, we think, throughout the commercial corridors too. It's not just residential. I'm not going to read this to you, but I know that the village has gone through and included some pre-application requirements for pre-application meetings, et cetera. That's very important. We talked about this, and I nearly got crucified at our work in progress presentation when I asked the question, but you know, is there any room for physical incentives? We would love to be able to require more civic open space. But the more civic open space you require, unless you're giving something back, you know, you're starting to tip into the, well, it's a takings type of argument. You know, the dimensional criteria, it's one thing to, design guidelines typically aren't dimensional or measurable. The code is dimensional and measurable. So if you're taking away developable land from me, I need to be getting something back. I included this because even though there's not an appetite, I know, in the village today for additional building height or additional densities, and there may never be. I am personally a fan of increasing the densities because you can't see it from the outside. You can see how tall a building is. But these days with micro units and smaller rentals, et cetera, you can get away with higher densities. But all that being said, this language is included because if you reach a point where you do want to start to consider incentives, they are more than just building height and density. You know, there might be pre-approval process, there might be tax, you know, abatements. There's a lot of different things you can do. Reduction in parking requirements, things like that. But I wanted to include this because it's a discussion that we've had, and I think it needs to be memorialized in the document. Talks a lot about promoting local businesses. Do we restrict franchises? Do we, you know, zone out the ability for national tenants to be on the corridor? We talked about that quite a bit. There's a little narrative discussion about how risky that can be in some cases. But we did include in the document what they call the formula businesses ordinance in the city of Stewart. And what they have done there, which is interesting, is that they've identified a very small area, which is their downtown, the most sensitive area, which might be your village or town center. And they restrict the size of a national franchise, and there are distance separation requirements. So it's not saying that Starbucks or I'm going to date myself, the Gap or whoever else can't be here. It's that there are limitations because we don't want to undermine the strength of our local businesses. And I think the presentation that you had earlier, although it was mind-boggling with data, shows how strong your local business environment is. We talked about goals when I was here last time, and I don't know how thrilled we are with this at this point. We were testing it, but I think the point of this, though, is to show that there are very important elements, I think, that are key to the character and identity of your community. You know, shade tree canopy, family and local businesses, environmentally conscious. We heard that over and over again. Incredibly strong neighborhoods, multi-generational neighborhoods, people that don't move, and their family, you know, their young ones move back in. The small-scale village and safe streets. You've actually done the heavy lifting on one of the bigger corridors, and that is a chasm that's separating the east and west of your community. So we wanted to express in sort of a graphic way, you know, what we felt were the goals. These, of course, can be updated or changed or revised, but it was something that was brought up by Councilmember Johnson. You know, we need to articulate what our goals are. Another thing that all of you, as I recall, brought up is, you know, what are the action items? You know, what are the key things? Okay, you're telling us that we got all of these, you know, we got 100 different projects in here. Where do we start? And so we've kind of gone through line by line, starting with adopt the plan, you know what I mean? Or accept the plan formally, whatever your council feels is appropriate. Begin discussions with Palm Beach County immediately about Old Dixie and Village Boulevard roundabout. That's going to be a long conversation, but that has immediate impacts. And it's not waiting upon the private sector to come in and do anything for you. Explore the canopy tree planting. Start having those conversations with your private property owners, especially where you see, especially as you move into the main of your community, which is, from what I can tell, US 1 into Tequesta. That's what everybody sees as the main. We know it's something different, but that is the first. We talked about this, the first impression. As people come in closer to the intersection of Tequesta and US 1, that canopy should be showing up, you know? So this goes through, it talks about the entities that are part of the coordination and the time frame. And this list, of course, can be added onto forever. Because as I mentioned before, the city is never done. You know, Mr. Allen will always have something else to do here in improving the village. But we also give sort of a generalized time frame. So this is, I think this is hopefully a good start on this. And again, it can be added to or modified as necessary. We have an Appendix A, which wasn't part of the plan before, which just goes through the creation of the master plan, the process, the charrette. It's really nice to go back, although, again, dating yourself, go back and look at some old charrette plans and see, you know, yourself as a 20-year-old or whatever doing master plans. But I think it really just, it's a lovely thing to have as part of the master plan, because the community can see themselves as authors in it, and that's really important. Also, there's an appendix on background and existing conditions, and then what we did is we lifted up the key code recommendations and put them into their own appendix, which is not something we've done before, but we wanted it to be sort of a discrete piece of work. So I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. I know you've been here for a long time. I mentioned we went out on a limb and are recommending the creation of 3 different district centers. Okay, the village center, which is centered about the village shops, the town center, which is centered about Main Street and Tequesta Drive, and then the village center north, which is centered about the public shopping center, the County Line Plaza. Each one of these radii are 1,350 feet. That's the 5-minute walking radius. That's the planner's, you know, go-to scale. If I am, I'm sorry, I can't read, but if I am at the center of Village Center, I can walk basically to to Old Dixie within 5 minutes, easily. Especially if it's, as it already is, a well-planted sidewalked area. I'm going to go through these briefly. So the idea is that these are 3 different contexts. There was a little bit of debate during the charrette. Where's the center of town? Well, the center of town is Main Street and Tequesta. No, the center of town is Seabrook and Tequesta Drive. And we thought, well, they're both incredibly important, but they both have kind of a different scale, and they both have kind of a different vibe. You know, the village center at Seabrook is really a locals thing, you know, which is really nice. People walking and biking there. And that's not necessarily where you could have 4-story buildings and, you know, where, you know, you're going to have maybe fireworks or whatever else, you know. And then, of course, up north at Village Center North, that's a very different context altogether. Doesn't mean that it's not important, but some of the rules might be different up there. So, quickly, this is Village Center, and the regulating plan, by the way, oftentimes when we do regulating plans, if we're writing a code for a city and say there's going to be a city-initiated rezoning, the regulating plan would become the new zoning map. It would show the new zoning sub-districts, etc. In this case, the thought is at this point is that this document would sort of support or augment your existing zoning map. Because what it shows are things like primary streets. Excuse me, let me go back. You'll notice that Old Dixie, US 1, Tequesta Drive, Main Street, and Bridge Road are all black. Those are what we're identifying as primary streets. That means they are held to the highest standard. Some of the interior streets, you know, they're not going to be as visible. You're not going to need to address them as much. But the context of those roadways change depending upon where you are. So we come up with a series of different street sections. We've got these details that show when you're at Seabrook Road on the left-hand side, you know, on the west side of Seabrook, you've got the beautiful swale with the street trees. On the east side, it's the back of the existing shopping center. And over time, if that ever redevelops, you want to have a symmetry there. So we show that the streetscape on Seabrook continues that and mirrors that very wide, ample planting area. Because I know we discussed this in August. How do we make that a better pedestrian connection from that intersection, from the neighborhood main and main, back now to your new recreation center? And part of the way you do that is have a continuous sidewalk on the east side with shade trees. And Tequesta Drive is not dissimilar, but it has some different criteria for like outdoor seating, etc. And this is Seabrook if you were to cut through the entire street. So that shows the symmetry of the roadway. You see in the plan down there to the left, you've got one street north, one street south. You might even make those sharrows so you identify them for cyclists as well. But you're able to get that continuous canopy of trees. This is the town center area, the regulating plan. Again, the circle is the 5-minute radius centered about Main Street and Tequesta Drive. We've identified with the red stars areas of civic importance. Each of those little bubbles, I'm not showing them all to you, but you see the little round circles that have the black line. Those are section lines. That shows you where we're cutting these sections through, so you understand what the relationship in that location we're recommending is the relationship between the building and the street and the sidewalk, etc. And again, there's a lot of similarities, but there are differences depending upon where you are. So, Bridge Road, streetscape, you see here, it has on-street parking, a continuous planting strip. Old Dixie, no on-street parking, but a continuous wider planting strip. Again, in each case, possibly buildings are built in the future that face those roadways. Main Street, definitely you have on-street parking, that's the image to the left. But rather than having a continuous parkway for trees, a planting strip, you've got a more urban condition. You've got trees that are in tree grades, like you might see on a main street somewhere. So just these subtle details. And then Tequesta Drive East, which is east of Main Street. There's a very unique condition there, and it doesn't really come out as well here, but where the bank building is. There's actually a change of grade there. And we didn't realize it. So it's a unique opportunity to actually maintain that change of grade because it doesn't exist anywhere else. And there's a retaining wall there. It's about 3 or 4, not even 3 or 4 feet, 3 or 4 steps up. But that's why this section is different. It shows a double row of trees, one down in the parkway that exists and one up on that podium for what that redevelopment might be in the future. And then these are described in detail within the text. Bridge Road is an important street. That cross section that you see there is looking east. To the left-hand side would be potentially 3 to 4 story buildings of town center. And on the right side would be possibly 3-story buildings in the future, but more than likely just keeping the buildings that are there. The key thing though is that you've got amply wide sidewalks, and the sidewalks have specific zones for tree plantings and furniture and infrastructure and the pedestrian zones, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then up north, this is the Village North Center. These are more highway-oriented type of situations. You see Old Dixie on the left. That's a continuation of that wide planting strip and continuous shade trees. And then on the right-hand side is the US 1 corridor. And that shows existing commercial properties trying to get the tree wells in the parking spaces that I talked about before. We talked briefly about the frontage types when I was here last time. Frontage types are a way to require or encourage exactly what it sounds like, the frontage types. Like for instance, in residential, you might have a porch. That's probably not applicable in the town center area, but if you're doing townhouses, the stoop is absolutely applicable. On your main street, on the lower right, shop front is perfectly applicable. And we go through and we detail the critical dimensions of each one of those. The arcade, apartment building forecourts, etc. So what we've done is that for each of these contexts, we've identified, what are the appropriate frontage types. In the village center area, for instance, porches are certainly appropriate on Tequesta Drive or Seabrook Road. You know, there's no reason why you couldn't have a house with a porch there. Stoops are appropriate. Bracketed balconies, excuse me, which are more urban buildings, are not. Certainly arcades and shop fronts are not on Seabrook Road. So each one of these districts we've gone through, and you'll notice here in Town Center, the porch front type of the single family house really isn't appropriate for any of the area within your town center. You want a more urban condition there. And by urban, I mean 3 to 4 story buildings with wide sidewalks. So we've gone through and tried to link the frontage types to the different streets that we've identified in the different sub-districts. And this is actually incorrect. I fixed this on my version. Sorry, Jeremy, I didn't send you the right one. It's Appendix D is not code recommendations. Code recommendations I just went through is Appendix C. Appendix D is that full spectrum of design guidelines that were in the previous document, but they're referenced in the core document and explained how they're supposed to be used. That they're as reference. They're not regulatory. So thank you for letting me go through all of this again. I hope that we have addressed the majority of the comments that were brought up. The comments that we got from you all in that workshop, I think made this a much better and more usable document, and that's the idea. And again, if there's anything that's missing, I'm happy to take any comments or questions this evening. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dana. Any council comments?
No. Looks great. If I woke up tomorrow and that's what Tequesta looked like, I'd be very happy. But, you know, it just could take 30 years. So everything on there I have no problem with, and nor do I have any suggestions on top of what you and your team have done. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I know I gave you a lot last time, and it was just because I try to be super, super transparent, because I only get to sit with these guys and gal once in the meeting, so I just like to put everything on the table, either use it, don't use it, but at least I put it out there. And yes, the biggest thing, and this is great, this is a good conclusion of everything we've gone through. I mean, really, it was just that thing, as I call it, on Tequesta Drive and Old Dixie, because it was just confusing. When I showed it around to people, it's just, they were like, what is that? It's huge. It's just confusing what it was, and that it was so big. And yes, you are right. So we have residential to the west, and then we enter into our commercial area. That's very visually apparent, but just that thing was just very large and confusing of what its purpose is or would be. So
I don't disagree with you.
that was just the really confusing, biggest confusing part.
That designer was from Miami. So.
No, that's okay. So I appreciate you hearing that, because I didn't know how to explain that. It was just very odd. But other than that, everything seems to have come together.
Thank you.
I definitely like that you're focusing on the openness for the inside of our village, because I know that's what we like to do as a big community family, is get together and see each other and be open and be able to connect to different areas, whether we're walking or biking or vice versa. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, Dana. Appreciate it again for all the hard work with the team and everything. And I think the design there was more to help us think outside the box, maybe, and get some different ideas and concepts. So I know that's where the designer was probably headed. But yeah, great job. I'd like to see somehow a blending of what Nielsen put together and what you put together with regards to the couple things like the lighting and the sidewalks and streetscaping, kind of have all that very similar. I think it's important that they do match, and that way when someone's coming in at Tequesta, they're like, okay, I feel the difference, I see it, I recognize it. I love the idea of going in and trying to talk about, adding more trees to different parking spots that might be not necessary in the shopping center. Is there a design guideline checklist needed for this? And would that be something that you could add? I know you kind of put some things together, but this is kind of a new idea, throwing that out there as something worth talking about maybe.
I would recommend not. We've done a number of design guidelines, particularly in historic districts, where there are Secretary of Interior standards that you have to follow to meet certain design criteria. And so a checklist is very good. I think that what Nils's team did, although I haven't seen the checklist, I wrote it down, I thought brilliant. That is very specific. Those are 11-story buildings. I think that there's more room to move on that, in my opinion. I worry that in the smaller fabric, this gets into the incentive type thing. You know, I don't know that you really have the teeth to require certain things. What we do in this, and not to go on, but you know, we do identify, if you want to do an Art Deco building, these are the type of windows that are consistent with Art Deco. These are the type of doors, you know, and you're not mandated to do it. So I just worry that in this particular case, the checklist might seem like a mandate.
Right. Maybe that, and I don't disagree with that. Maybe the checklist from a simplistic version would be, what design are you going after, sir or madame? And from there, that point, we can at least say, okay, this is kind of what we're looking at.
Now, if we want to maybe push it a little bit further, you know, you could decide that in your most sensitive of districts, which would be the village center and the town center, a local community to the south that I'm real familiar with, we wrote their design guidelines, and I think I mentioned this to you all, but they are not regulatory in the sense that the code is. But they're they do it in an interesting way. They're regulatory in the sense that if you don't do what's on these design guidelines, you have to come tell us why. And that's an approach that I think is interesting. That's something you might consider if there is a specific, if you want to do West Indies architecture in your town center or whatever it might be, Mediterranean revival. You could state that our preferred architecture here is Mediterranean Revival or West Indies. And if you choose to do something, and if you do that architecture, end of discussion. You know, assuming you meet all the code requirements and all of that. But if you're going to deviate from the preferred style, you have to come explain why. And I don't know. That might be a slippery slope legally. I thought it was pretty creative. But I think it's worth, that's why we kept it in there. I think it's worth, because we heard it a lot. You know, design guidelines and architecture.
I do think it's important. One of the aspects of Tequesta I think is so great is that it does have a balance of a variety of different designs in it. That kind of gives it some of that general character. So I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of having one specific guideline for one specific area. But the 3 circles that you drew, I love having that. Those are 3 different areas. I think you guys nailed that. Those are 3 different distinct areas of Tequesta that we can have certain codes that are more specific for those specific areas. So I'm glad you did that. I'd like to continue to move forward in that area.
I appreciate that. I think that can become a framework that can be built on over time as those, you know, as they mature even further.
Sure. So,
thank you.
Great job.
Yeah, I love the districts. I thought that was a really great addition to the plan. I really hope council and we decide to move forward with really identifying those. That would maybe be a code thing that we would change, would be to, like I said, like overlay on our zones to identify those districts.
It could be.
So I thought that was great. Just a couple questions on the development incentives. I know, Jeremy, I had tasked staff with kind of giving us an example of what density looks like, say at Paradise Park. Because I'm not saying I want density, I'm saying I don't know how I can make an educated decision if I don't know what it actually looks like. So we just got a conceptual plan for Paradise Park, right? So we have, if we were to do development incentives to increase density to get more civic open space there, what does that look like? Is it 4 more units? It's like, it's so hard for me to make an educated decision when we haven't really had actual data put in front of us. So I think it's important. I've asked for it once, so I'd really like to get that in front of council.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Data on density. So everyone's like, well, we don't want density. I'm like, well, what does that look like? So if you take like Paradise Park, for example, and we want to request more civic open space, but like Dana said, and what I have experience on, you're not getting that. I mean, unless you have an awesome developer that's going to give it to you, you're not going to get it unless you give something back. So.
But 16 to 20, you know, you're getting 4 more units.
But what does that look like? I mean, how many more cars on there? Is that going to impact our infrastructure? And I don't know if you can do density for just certain locations. I've heard some municipalities are kind of like moving around density, but I just would like to have a conversation about it before we say no and just kind of understand more what it looks like.
So that is why for discussing incentives, for me, it's not a blanket productive concept. For me, it's per project that would come towards us, because I don't know how you, we are so small as a village, we don't have the humongous commercial corridor like West Palm has. So for me, that's why I don't really like going down that road with it as a blanket across the village for incentives. For me, it would just be very detailed conversations with a project that would come our way, and it would be based on how, are we asking them for larger space? Yes. What would that higher density look like? I would have to take that almost one at a time.
Right, and that's what I'm asking. We haven't had a conversation at all, and like I said, I have heard about other municipalities are kind of starting to move around, so that'd be more of a Keith question. Can we just like, okay, these two areas is the only two areas will allow increased density for
something,
for them to give something back. So I think maybe we could talk about it more and see if there's any other avenues, and maybe we still don't like it, but at least have that conversation and see if there's any possibility for us to get some of the stuff that we want.
But the structure itself is not necessarily going to change.
Well, as you said, like the height will stay the same, but the density, but a lot of the density.
You're talking about usage of facilities and utilities and
Yeah,
stuff.
because the density part of it, even, I think there's gonna be zero appetite at all to increase story height, but if you add density, you know, a lot of people don't want to be busier here either. We don't want more cars on the road. I mean, you know, that's hard change, and we're so small, but what are we really talking about? How many more cars on the road? How much is it impacting our utilities? I mean, I know a lot of times if it impacts enough, they have to upsize their connection. So there's some stuff that they have to do if their development impacts utilities in a negative way. But I think we just need to be a little more educated and look down the road. And options, like you said, maybe just these two areas, so at least we can get more civic open space here or something.
Well, if I may, and the approach might be different. You know, the village center, at Seabrook and Tequesta, a developer there might be interested in a parking reduction because you've got a lot of walking and biking traffic there. Whereas that may not, appeal to a developer in the town center area, where I'm doing 4 stories and I got to park a bunch of cars and things. So you can tailor those type of incentives, depending upon where you are.
Can you give us a list of incentives that you think would be appropriate for those 3 sections?
There's a bit of a list there, but I can expand upon it if you'd like. And you can also, Keith, we've done this. You can test them. They can be limited duration. So long as you're not taking something away, you can pretty much do a lot of what you want. I mean, in my experience, if you decide because you really want to inspire a great project in the town center, you might say, for the next 2 years, we are going to offer an additional however many units of density, whatever, but you've got to be at building permit or commence construction within 2 years. And then it sunsets, and then it goes away. The problem is that when you rezone or upzone somebody, you can never get it back, or without at least without Keith being there. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think, and I don't know who the right person to kind of give. I mean, we're not the experts, that's why we hired you. But maybe, if we could start looking down that avenue and some options there that council can consider.
I just know that when Starbucks was in front of us, we had a traffic survey. A traffic guy came in, showed some intersections that failed and so forth. So that was out necessarily adding more density. That's just what we currently have. And it's kind of hard, I think, to ask that, what if we were fully built out, all 4 stories, 2 stories, wherever it was, people come, instead of 2,000 people coming and working, now we have 4,000 people because everything's finally built out. I mean, that's hard to...
Yeah, 100%. But like I said, I think we just need to look into it a little bit more. And then is there anything on here the council doesn't want to pursue? I know Councilmember Johnson said he likes everything on that, but some of these would be code changes, like if we did the formula business thing, that would have to be an actual code change, wouldn't it? The franchise of what Stewart did, the formula based.
The formula use, the formula
yes,
businesses.
That would need to be a
that's an ordinance.
Yeah. So there are some things in here that have to be. Is there anything council doesn't want to go down the avenue of that was presented in here?
Well, the reason I said what I said is I like everything is because, I mean, this isn't, we're not signing off on this and then we're going to start building, right? Like, this is all conceptual and it looks fantastic.
Next step is to put it in the code.
Right, but, yeah, I see what you're saying. There was, well, to answer your question, there was nothing that I saw as far as code goes that I hate.
I'm sorry to go on, but if I may, oftentimes the next step is that one of these documents is quote-unquote adopted or approved by the council. That doesn't obligate you to do any of it. But it sends a message that we've got a game plan going forward. It probably all won't look like the way it is, but it authorizes staff to start having these conversations. And then once you've approved it or adopted or accepted it, whatever, you can start to cherry pick the pieces in there that you want to turn into, you want to codify, you want to turn into legal language. And so you might have a workshop just about, do we want to limit franchise or formula businesses? And I've just provided you what a small town where our office is has done. And I think they did it in a smart way. They're built out, though. That's easier for them. They're a little, if you know the Main Street in Stewart, it's pretty much built out. You don't have a lot of room for that anyway. But it's not an all or nothing type of thing.
Right, and that's what I mean. That's why I just, to say what I do like and don't like right now, we're going to be picking through this and choosing what projects to pursue. And I don't know. I don't have an opinion on the entire presentation right now, right?
Okay, I just simply asked because if anyone was really against anything, because I think the drive-through location would be another one. If we're really against it, let's take it out now. But if everyone's to date in favor of it, I just wanted to pose the question, so we don't keep revisiting stuff. It's not necessary. My final question, I want to understand the stoop, the front stoop, because it says 21 inches. I think the building level has to be 21 inches above grade. What is that? I mean, is that can the building go to almost 2 feet higher? I was trying to understand that.
Oftentimes when and we're going through a little bit of a debate in this right now, but oftentimes we recommend that residential buildings that have residential on the ground floor are raised 2 or 3 steps up from the finished grade. And that's a privacy reason. It's an architectural reason because if you look at historic districts, the houses are always raised up. Now, most of them will have crawl spaces, and that's not really what's built these days. These days, what's built is a stem wall with slab on grade. But getting the buildings up, obviously, it gets you out of the water if you have a flood event. But this is not to be confused with FEMA flood requirements. This is an architectural issue. We don't recommend that in commercial buildings because obviously you need easy passage. And the ADA requirements for residential, single family in particular, are different. But it's an architectural and a privacy issue. It's a prominence on the street. The stoop is typically, you'll go up a couple steps and it's that small little covered porch area that you would see in a townhouse, like a traditional townhouse.
Oh yeah, no, I know what a stoop is.
Okay,
I was asking if it's
about the dimensions.
Say we're recommending it, and you're 21. I think the recommendation is 21 inches minimum above grade, if I remember correctly. Sorry, I don't have that slide in front of me. So if we're recommending it, do they get an additional? Because we don't measure just by stories; we also measure by height too. So would they get an additional 21 inches on the top? I guess I wasn't clear there. If we're recommending something.
Yeah, you know what? That's come up in different places. And it depends upon where you might have to modify where you're measuring buildings from, because some cities measure from the crown of the roads, and yeah.
Is it from,
Okay.
Do you know if they measure from the grade or from the street level? Grade.
So finished grade?
From the adjacent grade. Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know that I've noticed a bunch of stoops around here. But if it's something we're recommending, then are we going to give an additional 21?
Well, there is a recommendation here that you just measure buildings by the number of floors and not by feet and inches.
Yeah.
And that helps.
Yeah, so for the record, I like that the village has by feet and by height.
Stories and height.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it gives creativity of which way they want to go then.
There's a lot to chew on. And
Yeah.
hopefully this is a good guide to give you direction, in some of the areas.
Okay. Great. Any other council comment? No? Okay, I'll open to public comment.
Thank you very much. It's been great to work
Thank
with you.
you, Dana.
Appreciate it.
Steve Downing.
Okay.
I don't think you need more detail on the development incentives. I think you need to decide what the village of Tequesta will look like in your mind in 50 years. and then stick to your vision. Tight zoning codes have protected the original character of areas in South Florida over the last 100 years in cities like Coral Gables in Miami-Dade County and the town of Palm Beach in Palm Beach County. Those codes have preserved the high quality of life that the residents enjoy in those towns with low traffic density and high property values. They've grown the property values overall commercially and residentially, and that's allowed the municipality to continually reinvest in the infrastructure to keep it up to date, strong, and attractive to developers that want to come and benefit from that. So that's also enhanced the municipality's abilities to stay away from providing or offering development incentives, which is just a discount. You're discounting your town to the newbie developer, which is seeking to benefit from the taxes that the prior residents had paid to make that town attractive. So in essence, you're just providing a discount to the detriment of the long-term quality of life for the residents whose taxes supported the past, present, and future attractiveness of the area. Not a big fan of that. I think you just need to look at density and height code changes as what they are. You're discounting the community, its future, the density, the traffic count. Nobody's going to like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
It's not really, what I have to say is not really in regard to Dana's presentation, but the mayor, in the previous presentation, you said, well, how can we, it was something about how can we make somebody do something that's not on their property? I think you were wondering about, you liked the way Beach Road looked, but how could, you didn't want to have a hit and miss appearance. And then the second thing that you brought up in this, in your questions that you just had, it had to do with something that I thought that I just learned about within the last week, and I got clarification about it today. It's the town of Juno Beach has in their code something I think that they call calculation of community benefit. Every non-single family home development has to demonstrate the community benefit that they are providing to that community in Juno Beach. So for example, I witnessed this myself. They had a big project for them on the northwest corner of the intersection of Donald Ross and US 1. It's called Clarita or something like that. This guy, it was millions and millions of dollars, okay? And he put, open to the public, he put a splash pad in there, a dog park, and something inside the building, I think a museum. Yeah, it was a museum, okay? And they still weren't satisfied, the council. So on the spot, in his final presentation, the developer, they basically said they wanted $500,000 to renovate and expand their police department, because that was what they thought was the value of all of that stuff that he proposed, and this thing of $500,000. That was their calculation of the community benefit that he needed to give, and he did it right on the spot. Boom. He didn't even flinch. So I think that might be a way for you guys to get what you want. For example, in the village center, if you want that park, and you're wondering, how am I going to get it? There's your community benefit. So that's what they have in their code, and it works. I saw it.
I'd probably have a hard time going to sleep that night. Doesn't sound right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. Done. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
5 minutes early. Right, 9 o'clock, we're done.